Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the June 19th meeting of the Town of Los Gatos Council meeting. And could I have a roll call vote, please?
Thank you and good evening.
A roll call.
Councilmember Barbara Spector.
Here.
Councilmember Rico Sayak.
Here.
Councilmember Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Vice Mayor Steve Leonardis.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Rob Rennie.
Here. All right, so next up we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and we invite a member of our community to come up and help me do that. So at this time I'd like to invite Charlie Zhu up to help me out. So this is Charlie. So first of all, we'll tell you a little bit about him. You're in the 6th grade at Fisher Middle School. Are you enjoying Fisher Middle School? Okay, I know that's a very good school. Charlie likes to play basketball and swimming. You also play classical guitar, and you like to draw. You won 2nd place in the 2017 Sierra Tahoe Classic Guitar Competition. Wow, that's impressive. And you love learning history. I do too. That's good. And you like doing paper craft and archery. Wow. A couple of your favorite subjects are Native American and Greek mythology. Wow. All very interesting. It also says in community service, you've done service at a ranch, Dave's Elementary, McAuliffe Elementary, and a retirement center. Wow, that's great. Okay, so now if everybody could stand and join us for the pledge, and I'll give it to Charlie to take it away.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. Okay. Go ahead and shake hands with Councilmember Jensen and Vice Mayor Leonardis. And we'll give you a treat to take with you, Councilmember Sayak. Okay, let's one more hand for our pledge leader. Thank you, Charlie. Okay, so next up, I have a recognition for the small business for Pancho Pimentel. If you would join me up here, I'll come around and we'll go to the podium there. Welcome. So tonight we're recognizing Summit Bicycles. It says here that Summit first opened your doors in 1995, and that Los Gatos was your 2nd location, so you've got a few locations, and you strive to be Los Gatos. Summit Bicycle strives to be the Los Gatos local, friendly, and neighborhood bike shop, providing excellence in product quality and staff knowledge and mechanics. You value community and its youth by training and hiring local youth to work in the shop. Summit Bike gives back to the community by sponsoring community charities, events, and rides. And I also know you do bicycle valet sometimes for music in the park, and you helped us out when we, with the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition, when we did it. Ride around town. We started at Summit Bikes. You helped us get started there. So thank you for all of the help in the community and all your... so would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Thanks to the town for having us. We love serving the community. We're happy to be here and happy to continue to provide many years of customer service for everybody.
Great. Pose for a picture. Okay, so at this time I'll invite the town manager to come up and help me do a staff recognition.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to invite Tammy Church and Chris Drain to join me, our parking control officers. As we described last time, the staff themselves recommend their peers for recognition for excellent customer service and really embodying the values that the town has. So we have some recognition items for you. You will each have an edible arrangement, and then Mayor, if you could provide the plaque to our staff. Let me also just add that parking control is sometimes viewed as an independent operation, but really it's integral to our police department. And as you know, this valley, as well as California, is dealing with a lot of auto burglaries right now, and having the extra patrol and the extra eyes on our municipal garages are very much appreciated as we really try and stop all those burglaries from happening. So thank you so much for your service to the town. We're very proud of your accomplishments. Thank you.
Okay, next on our agenda, closed session report. I believe we had one last week. Do we need to report on that?
Do the before. Are you? Closed session report.
The council met in closed session to discuss labor negotiations, and no action was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Okay, thank you. So next up, we have council and town manager matters. If we could start with Councilmember Spector, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since our last council meeting, I did the ribbon cutting for IES Indoor Environmental Services and met with community members.
Thank you. Councilmember Sack.
Okay, since our last public hearing, there were a series of Cities Association meetings, the Executive Committee, Legislative Action Committee, as well as the board meeting. Just wanted to share that there were some items, some bills that we took action on. 828, which is the RENA bill, Cities Association sent a letter in opposition. I think given the conversation that we had at our last joint town council meeting, that was something of importance to the community. And there were other bills that we also are paying attention to, specifically 831, which is, and I'm blanking right now. 831 is a letter we sent that is specific to ADUs, accessory dwelling units, and it was a letter to Bob Wachowski sharing our concerns, Cities Association concerns, with the state language that just takes state control directly to the and eliminates local control over ADUs. And so that's a watch, and that's something that we are asking all our cities to pay attention to. In addition, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy, I attended as an alternate, and an action there was we voted to approve a 15-year power purchase agreement for renewable supply in Duran Mesa, which is in New Mexico. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. And since the last council meeting, I was out of town for several days, so I'd like to thank Councilmember Sack for filling in for me on the Cities Association Board and the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Board meetings. I did attend the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Finance Committee today, and I attended the LAFCO Commission meeting on June 6th. And that's all I have to report. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Since our last meeting, I attended a Youth Commission meeting and a West Valley Sanitation District Committee meeting where we gave the district manager an evaluation, as well as the Treatment Plant Advisory Committee meeting in San Jose, where we just handled some unfinished business reports. That's it.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Jensen.
I have nothing to report.
All right. To the town manager matters.
Thank you. I just want to remind everyone that we are looking forward to celebrating 4th of July on the 4th of July with the Symphony at Oak Meadow Park. Please come out and join us. And then beginning on July 8th, Sunday at 5 p.m., we start our Music in the Park series here at Civic Center Lawn, and that will run for 5 Sundays in a row. And during the summer, we are also engaged in a recruitment for several boards and commissions, including our General Plan Update Advisory Committee. So we're really encouraging everyone to sign up. Applications are due August 1st, and interviews will be on August 7th. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that moves us on to our consent calendar. I have consent items 1 through 14. Would any member of the council wish to pull an item? Councilmember Sack. Okay, I already have cards from the public, so that will be pulled. Anything else? Seeing none. Would any member of the public wish to pull an item other than number 6, which has already been pulled? Seeing none, I'll come back to the council for a motion. Councilmember Jensen.
Move approval of the consent calendar with the exclusion of number 6.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion, a second. Any other comments? Anybody wish to note they're going to vote no or recusals? I will be voting no on number 14. So all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody against? Okay, we already had no other comments, so they all pass unanimously except number 14 with the mayor voting no. So with that, we go to verbal communications next, I guess. Would any member of the public wish to address us on an item not on the agenda? You have 3 minutes. I have one card from Rachel Hobbs. Please come forward. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Dear Mr. Mayor, council members and staff, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. My name is Rachel Hobbs and I work for PACE Funding Group. We're headquartered here in Los Gatos. We're on University Avenue. We were founded in 2014 and we've been here in Los Gatos since we started. We moved to the Alan Pinnell building in early 2017. We're very happy to be located here in Los Gatos. We feel we contribute to local businesses with restaurants and hotels, as we have a lot of remote staff who come and spend training here, spend weeks and days training here. PACE Funding Group is a property-assessed clean energy company. It's otherwise known as PACE. PACE is a way of financing clean energy improvements to a residential or commercial property which is completed through the property tax bill. A huge number of energy conservation, water conservation, and renewable energy improvements are included in this financing. It can be new roofing, HVAC, solar, new windows, doors, and that can be drought-tolerant landscaping, shade structures, those sorts of things that are all clean energy products. PACE legislation signed at a state level in 2016 and 2017 has brought considerable changes to the industry and enhanced consumer protections and reporting responsibilities. The PACE companies have been brought under the oversight of the Department of Business Oversight and will be going through a licensing process before January 2019. Cities, counties, and towns need to approve each PACE program before they're eligible to offer PACE financing to the property owners in that municipality. The vast majority of municipalities have now approved multiple programs so that their property owners may have maximum choice and benefits from such programs. More programs means more choices for your property owners and the local home improvement businesses. The town of Los Gatos does have one provider to date. Renew Finance is approved to offer California First in the town. And the data from California First that shows that 16 projects have been funded for just over $500,000. 59% of those are renewable energy projects and 41% of those are energy efficiency projects. They've done a lot in the town. 808 tons of greenhouse gases have been emitted over the lifetime of these projects. I'm here today on behalf of the CSCDA Open PACE program that enables PACE Funding Group. I would like to formally request that the Town Council and staff consider the expansion of PACE programs in the town of Los Gatos and include PACE Funding Group, which is located here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's see if you have any questions. Councilmember Sack.
Actually, my question's not of the speaker, but of staff afterwards.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. So the question is if I know we've identified priorities in the past, and this has been something that I've always put on, is there a process so that I can at least formally request that we look at this subject?
Thank you very much. We've had several entities come forward requesting that we modify our resolutions to add additional financing companies to the offerings. This is something that's been in our work plan, and really it's never been a high strategic priority, but it's been one of the background items, and it's just a matter of breaking free some staff time to get it done. So we're hoping that within the next fiscal year, you'll be seeing a resolution not only for this company, but perhaps for a couple others that have also come forward.
Okay, thank you. So next speaker, I have Austin Trillo. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Austin Trillo. I'm a marketing consultant at New Museum Los Gatos, or NUMU as we refer to around town. I'd like to share some exciting news with you and with the community assembled here, as well as the KCAP viewing public. NUMU is presenting an exhibition celebrating the history of Los Gatos High School. The exhibition is called Sis Boom Ba, The Life and Times of Los Gatos High School. It's a three-dimensional yearbook-style exposition that explores what it has meant to be an LGHS Wildcat over the course of the school's 100-year-plus history. Relive highlights of Wildcat dominance in sports, the arts, student activities, and the social events that have created long-lasting friendships and a distinct campus community. Experience the evolution of high school events and the traditions over the last century, and check in on notable alumni who left their mark locally on the world stage. In addition, the exhibition will explore the history of a teenager, a word that came into the American lexicon in the early 20th century. Sis Boom Ba opens on September 8th in our lower floor gallery. We're also producing a yearbook-style catalog for the exhibition that folks can pre-order now. All the details are available on the NUMU website. And finally, our curators are still on the lookout for LGHS mementos to be considered for display in the upcoming exhibition. Please bring your LGHS keepsakes to NUMU on Thursdays between 11 and 2, now through June 28th. When you arrive at the museum, check in with the admission desk. We'll ask you to fill out a form, and we'll photograph your objects. We're still looking for the following items: sports and club paraphernalia. This would include trophies, awards and certificates, and miscellaneous medals. Graduation garb, including diplomas, tassels, and cords. Class rings, school dance photos, homecoming and prom crowns, theater props and costumes, uniforms including band, dance, cheer, sports, etc. Personal photos, either taken at school or in an off-site school function. Miscellaneous documents, including report cards, class assignments, art projects, love letters, even detention slips. Student government campaigns. Do we have any questions? And always, we're located right above and over across the Civic Center Way, and definitely come by and see us at the museum.
Okay, thank you, Austin.
Thank you.
All right, so next up I have Ted Scola, but your subject looks like it's item number 17. We're going to have a discussion for item number 17 on modifying the ordinance for animals and fowl. So would you like to wait? If it's the same thing, I'd like to keep it with that agenda item. So I'll change it to agenda item 17, and we'll call you later when we get to that one. So I don't have any other cards currently for verbal comment. Would anybody else wish to speak to us on an item not on the agenda? Seeing nobody. Seeing somebody coming forward, go ahead, John Shepherdson, and fill a card out afterwards, please.
Thank you. I didn't practice that. So thank you again. And if we could. So I've said this before to the council, and I suggest it again, that we hire someone like Management Partners to come in and review the entire budget, both on the income side and the expenditure side. And really, it makes a lot of sense to me because of things like this. We have $70 million in unmet infrastructure needs, which is part of the packet tonight. And I guess it's a conservative number, but I also saw in the packet this number that the cost to infrastructure, these are the numbers that I saw. And then we have these numbers here of approximately $50 million in unfunded employment-related liabilities, I understand it. So if we take those numbers, we're at about $120 million. And so that's why I think Management Partners, if we spend $50,000 or $75,000 for them to come in and review, to look for efficiencies. And if we are making the best possible use of our money, then we can get a kind of verification of that. And if there are efficiencies, as they've been able to find in other municipalities across the state and across the country, then we can save money. So to me, it's really, for the amount of money that we would spend on something like this, there'd be a number of benefits. And like I said, if we are operating totally efficient with our dollars, then we would get the peace of mind of getting a sort of independent review of that. And again, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for letting me speak.
Looks like you have a question, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Mr. Shepherdson, when you say Management Partners has worked with many other entities throughout California and such, do you have any examples of some that may be our neighbors or some that are similar in size to us where they were able to help them improve with all their the way they run their business, their cities? Has there been any articles or
yeah,
any
on their
examples?
website they have municipalities for the state of California and across the country. One that I don't know if I printed it out. It was, here's one. This is, I guess, Alameda CTC Agency Consolidation. And then they had one that I just saw briefly tonight. Oh, here's Las Vegas. And then they had one mentioning Orange, California. I also saw on their website City of San Jose, a number of municipalities in the state. And locally, I can provide that to you. I'm happy to look at their website and download those that for municipalities perhaps in the Bay Area or municipalities similar to Los Gatos.
That would be great. Thank you.
Certainly.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Shepherdson. Would anybody else wish to address us on an item not on the agenda tonight? Seeing none, I'm going to close the verbal testimony and go back to agenda item number 6, which got pulled. If staff could lead us off, and actually, so number 6 is a second reading of an ordinance, so which means we've had a long road to get here. If you could sort of summarize for me, what was the road that we've taken so far on that one?
So this road actually started a couple of years ago when the council created a citizens committee to look at revenue enhancements, and one of the ideas that the committee came up with was a sales tax measure, so that way the town would have a dedicated source of revenue. They also looked at other revenue sources such as a transient occupancy tax. A couple of years ago, the council was not interested in a sales tax, but instead moved that we would put on the ballot for 2016 a increase to our transit occupancy tax, which the voters subsequently approved. Last year, our finance committee took up the same question around revenue measures, particularly in light of the potential need for changing demographics and economics here in the town and making sure that we are prepared for our future. The committee recommended that we move forward with a sales tax measure. That recommendation came to the town council. The town council held a public meeting in these chambers, listened to public testimony, and asked the Finance Committee to move forward and draft ballot language. The Finance Committee did that, and then subsequently the Town Council had an opportunity to review and comment on the ballot language as well as the public. Last council meeting, the council considered a series of actions, including a resolution that contained the approved ballot language and the sales tax ordinance. The ordinance, as the mayor mentioned, is back tonight for second reading. This is an ordinance of the people of Los Gatos. So should the tax be placed on the ballot and should the voters enact it, this ordinance would be essentially an ordinance of the people of Los Gatos, and it would essentially take effect 10 days following the adoption of the resolution declaring the results of the 2018 election. Assistant Town Manager Ann Andrews and I are here to answer any specific questions that you have, but throughout our deliberations, the council has asked very tough questions about our financial picture. You have in your possession a desk item and an addenda that addresses the $70 million. That was a question that came from public comment and has subsequently been addressed. There was a lot of debate about special versus general tax. The council voted in the majority to go with a general tax. So we've fully vetted various options, including how much, when, et cetera. So we are now at this next step, which would be a step closer to placing this on the ballot so that the voters would have the choice of whether or not to provide this opportunity for a dedicated revenue source for our town. Thank you.
Thank you. So Councilmember Jensen has a question. We'll start there.
Actually, I have 3 questions. They're process-oriented. The first one is, are there any kind of timing restraints for placing this measure on the ballot that fit with any council action tonight or the second reading?
We have to have the ballot information, I believe it's the first or second. Our first meeting in August would be the last time that you would be able to enact this ordinance in order for us to place it on the ballot. Everything else has been done in a timely manner, and we're just at this point for the second reading.
Okay, my second question is, if the council were to determine that it wanted to make any kind of change to the ordinance that was voted on last time, does it take the form of a reconsideration? So, for example, Alpine Avenue has to be at the next meeting, has to be someone proposing it who voted for it, et cetera. Is it that, or is it an amendment? And if it's an amendment, does it require a 4/5 vote?
So with reconsiderations, it would have to be somebody who voted in favor of the item who now has a difference of opinion. So that would be one issue is are you reconsidering the item itself? If a council member alternatively had some additional edits or found something that needed to be adjusted, we might be able to handle that with the adoption of the second ordinance. We did get a little bit of communication from our town attorney. If this is in fact a reconsideration, then essentially we would need to have a special meeting to rescind the ordinance. We would not be able to do that this evening because it was not brought to our attention in a timely manner.
Please go ahead.
Just one of my questions didn't get answered. If it's deemed in some fashion by the town attorney or whoever it is that it's not a reconsideration, but that it's an amendment to existing language, an editorial change, does that require a 4/5 vote?
I don't have the answer to that, but I would imagine that any modification to an ordinance that took a 4/5 vote would continue to require a 4/5 vote.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. We, today on agenda item 6, the request from staff is to adopt an ordinance, and that ordinance is attachment 1 draft ordinance. Refresh my memory. I don't remember seeing this form of draft ordinance previously. Was it before us previously?
It was before you at your last meeting.
Okay, in this form.
In essentially this form, I think the only change is that subsequent to the last council meeting, we were in contact with the State Board of Equalization. They have since changed their name, so all prior references to the State Board of Equalization are now references to the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Sayak.
Yeah, so I'm not ready to all the process questions, reconsideration versus amendments. I just want answers to some, if the staff can just walk me through. There is a question on how much is really unfunded liabilities, how much really is our capital improvements that are unfunded. And I want to make sure I understand the numbers that are in our resolution and our ordinance before us. So if you can walk me through that 70 million, that would be helpful.
And we still have public testimony to go to, just so you know.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and Town Council. So when the question was asked, we went back and not only did we look at the existing current operating budget, but then we also looked at previous conversations that as staff we know have transpired at council in the past. Many of those conversations have been needs that have been identified as nice to have. Some of them have been identified as need to have, and others have been identified as if we had them, they would probably create future savings for the town. And so in the staff response to the question, you can see, for instance, the parking garage was an item that was heard on March 20th. The last time, and in the staff report, it was clearly indicated that this was probably no longer a feasible consideration due to the financing associated with it. Up to that point, there appeared to have been good council will to at least evaluate it and to consider it, but because of the inability to finance it, that pretty much ended the conversation at that point. One of the other areas we can look at is the idea of traffic mitigation improvements. There is actually a page on C35 of the current operating and capital summary budget, which is a page that came out of attachment 1 of a 2014 traffic impact policy resolution. And those were items that were identified that would be good ways to help us increase traffic flow throughout the community. Excuse me. And if there's any additional questions regarding that actual policy, we can either refer them to the Director Morley or others in the audience. Another area we looked at is the pavement condition index management, which was a 2016 kind of assessment. That assessment also talked about the idea of the town's PCI and what it would take to maintain PCI at current levels, enhance PCI in the neighborhood of 5 points. And then there was even one model, which was an unconstrained model, that if you were living in a perfect universe and you were going to have ideal roads for your community and bring them up to around an 84 PCI level, what would that take? And so that's what that monies are attributed to. One of the other things that we know of is the fact that on Highway 17, and this is also in the traffic mitigation improvements, we've identified the expansion of the pedestrian bridge, of a pedestrian type bridge over Highway 17 at Lark. And that is now, and it was actually in the CIP, estimated to be between $5 and $10 million. And so if you just look at very specific items the council has discussed, those conversations alone come to the vicinity of between $80 and $100 million in conversations that have either ceased because there's no longer the ability to conceptualize the expense associated with it, or there are things that have been identified that if revenue ever is available, we want them on a future plan. And then the response goes on to say that throughout the entire CIP, there are references to the fact that virtually none of the CIP programs, with the exclusion of a few taxes and grants, have dedicated revenue sources. Most of what happens every year is if there's any type of a surplus remaining from our budget discussions, that surplus then moves to the GFAR, and then the GFAR enhances our ability to do these types of improvements. But there is no dedicated source for the majority of these.
Follow-up questions, or you're okay?
So one follow-up question, if I may. So with the proposed ballot language, it highlights areas of priority, let's say. But the issue is, because it's a general tax, there is no guarantee that those funds will necessarily go there. And what's the provision in the ballot that gives it, that basically says this is a general fund that may go to other purposes?
Thank you, Council.
Are there ways to further define so that there gives more assurance that these are the intended projects we plan to fund?
Thank you, Council Member. Because you're constrained to a certain amount of words in the ballot language, there isn't specificity in, if you do this, we will build X bridge, or if we do this, we will repave Y road. So ballot language, unless you do a specific tax, tends to be very general in nature. And I thank you for the question, because I think there's a little bit of confusion between what's actually in the ballot language, which is what our residents will see when they make a determination, and then really what is starting to be ministerial between what's required by the county to adopt a ballot a measure that you want to put on a county ballot. And so the ballot language, when we discussed this at our last meeting, one of the things that we did add is the language that says, and other unrestricted general revenue purposes. And so within the ballot language, even though we allude to the fact that our community has identified maintaining safety patrols, improving traffic flow, reducing congestion, and maintaining neighborhood streets, these are items that have been identified by the community as important. They're also items that have been identified by the council through strategic priorities as important. But we do then add the language that says, and other unrestricted general revenue purposes. So the ballot language that'll be seen by our residents as they determine whether or not they believe this is an appropriate vote for themselves will show that it can be used for any unconstrained purpose.
Go ahead.
And so if that language were to be removed, then it becomes a specific tax?
No. So a specific tax would have been, it was discussed during the discussions to date, that would not only require a different voting threshold, that would require a 2/3 vote, but if we had identified specific tax as the avenue that the council wanted to pursue, then we probably would have isolated it to a more specific purpose. Not necessarily identifying a bridge per se, but we would have said this specific tax is for public safety purposes. This specific tax is for infrastructure purposes. But this council, during their deliberations, appeared to want to have the general tax because you didn't want to have to meet the higher threshold of a 2/3 vote.
Councilmember Spector?
Thank you. Following up on Ms. Sayak's questions, with regard to the ordinance, what I'm hearing you say is that the public won't see the ordinance. I think that's what you said. Before I should first ask you, are you saying the public will not see this ordinance?
I'm not saying the public won't see the ordinance. The ordinance is a posted document, just like all our documents, and it is part of the steps necessary to move to getting a ballot measure on the Santa Clara County ballot. And it also is one more way of documenting, as the town manager identified in her comments, identifying that there are going to be certain covenants that we're binding to with the community. How we'll have an oversight committee, how the monies are intended to be spent through areas that have been identified as important to the community.
Okay, that being the case, then I was looking at the ordinance, and Section 1 talks about that the voters find that all the recitals are true and correct. If they don't see this, how could they do that?
So this is standard language in an ordinance for a ballot language, for a ballot measure. So essentially, the voters will see the language that the assistant town manager just read a portion of to the council. But essentially, the recitals, all of the whereas statements, are captured in the 70 or so words. It talks about, whereas we care about quality of life. Quality of life is in the ballot language. Whereas we have unmet infrastructure needs such as potholes, road repair. We're less constrained with words in our whereas statements for the ordinance, but if you look at it in parallel with the ballot language, essentially all of those same topics are covered in the whereas statements, including the oversight committee, the mandatory financial audits, and the fact that this would sunset in 20 years. So while we have more room in an ordinance to be more elaborative, essentially those very same topics are covered in the ballot language.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions at this time, I will open the public testimony. First up, I have Phil Keown. And you have 3 minutes.
Let me get organized.
Sure. kind of glaring a little bit. I think we can more or less see it.
Phil Keowan, Wissahickon Avenue, rolls off your tongue. Let me just start very quickly because I know I have a short amount of time and you have received a number of documents from me. So the question before you is the ballot language misleading or not? And the second question is this an ill-conceived sales tax measure? So the question I have is the resolution that you voted on says that you're going to ensure the funds are spent as promised. Well, what's being promised? This resolution calls for certain items around unmet infrastructure needs, enhancing police patrols. So that's A. And then B, there is a line item that says general purposes. So which is it? Are you making a legal commitment to spend the money towards the items in A, or are you making a legal commitment to spend the items toward B? It can't be both. So let's find out what the Finance Committee was told. In a general revenue tax, they clearly stated, November 29th, that a general tax may be used for any public purposes. The funds are fully discretionary. So why would you put on the ballot language that suggests that it's going to go towards these supposedly important needs, when in reality, the legal language says you can do whatever you want? And to answer the question, what is a voter going to vote on? What is on the ballot? They're not going to see the actual legal document. Everyone knows that. So in my opinion, this is the most grossly misleading language you can conceive of. And it's wrong. It's just wrong. You should tell people what this money is going to be spent for, which is for anything that you choose to spend it on. So let me move to the second piece of this. Why is this ill-conceived? Well, we were told that we have a capacity to get 0.25%, a quarter of a percent. That's what's available. And I don't know. I mean, I've heard different numbers. I'm now up to 97 million of unmet needs. First it was 70. Who knows what this number is? But if you take the 97 million, the 54 million unfunded pension, we're at 151. If you really believe that, why wouldn't you ask for the full quarter? Why would you stop at an eighth? It's available to you. So here's my recommendation. What I would do is change the ballot language. All you have to do is change the first sentence to fund any public purpose. To get away from the language that says to fund essentially town services. That's misleading. That's not what's going to happen. So that's my recommendation. Change the ballot language.
So let's see if you have any questions. Any questions for Mr. Keown? I don't think so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so next up I have Lee Fagot.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members and town staff. This has been an interesting discussion already on this item 6. And I'm glad to see that you did pull this for further discussion. The number 70 million we've heard a number of times, and we've only heard it go up from that, and that it is on the ballot measure, it states, to meet unmet infrastructure needs for projects such as potholes, streets, and road repairs. That number, 70 million, appears a few more times in a current review of the town's finances. For example, 70 million is the sum of unfunded retirement benefits, although I've just heard tonight that's even up. And 70 million is, quote, for infrastructure details provided a few days ago by the town staff, which included other items not noted in the ordinance. For example, well, we heard about the town garage, 12 to 25 million. That's 100% variance. The 5 to 10 million for the Highway 17 footbridge and bike lane, also 100% variance between 5 and 10 million. 34 million for traffic mitigation. But that plus these other projects we just heard about a few minutes ago are projects that are going to cover a 5-year span. They're not all immediately to be spent. 70 million is also the sum of all the town's reserves today, including both mandated and discretionary spending. Further, the town's budget's general fund, just approved, does show net surpluses, that is, revenue to expenses, each of the next 5 years. Why not be forthright and factually state these obligations and amend the draft ordinance proposed to show reserves and ongoing maintenance cost, and separately indicate new construction as part of the ordinance so that you let all the citizens know what is challenging us now. Have that wording in the voter's handbook, and that these are going to be challenging and they're going to be ongoing expenses, and that we, the town, are actually dealing with these items. Also, please create a charter for the Oversight Committee that would provide more participatory management, as this ordinance now only provides for 1 meeting per year, post-expenditures, and only to review what was already spent. Let's use the dictionary and look up the definition of oversight, which is to manage. That's the definition. So, and to do so that we don't end up with something that is an oversight in retrospect, which is a problem. Let the Oversight Committee be more proactive and a resource to our community and town staff. Please be more open, complete, and candid in your messaging to our community. And I also thank all of you for what you've done, including the staff thus far.
Thank you. Any questions? We have one from Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Fagot. Question: If it passes as a general tax, and all the monies that are collected could be used for town expenses, then what is your vision of what an oversight committee would be doing?
To help with the selection of the priorities. What are the most challenging in terms of a higher financial impact later on? For example, something that's going to be insignificant in terms of its net cost to the community would be a lower priority than spending it on a higher priority. PCI, raising that, getting the pension obligation done, put away so that we're not losing 7% and instead we're only earning 1%.
So your conceptualization would be that the committee would be directing or advising as to fund expenditures?
No, it is directing us to means they have the ultimate decision making. No, they would be a resource to help with an honest dialogue discussion so that the town staff recommends to the council how to spend the money. It would be an adjunct to perhaps the finance committee and work with them in a collaborative fashion. It's another resource, but I don't see the oversight committee saying this is what you have to do, but rather the oversight committee could say, here are the things that are the most pressing, and if they're not dealt with, here's the consequence. They would do that type of analysis and help with recommendations.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sayak?
So, Mr. Fagot, I'm having trouble trying to figure out how that would differ from the Finance Committee. So, following Councilmember Spector's question, if it's a general tax and there's no specific purpose to it, and it's just helping guide, suggest, based on priorities, how does that differ from what the Finance Committee and/or essentially the council is supposed to be doing, i.e. funding based on priorities?
That's a question I struggled with over the weekend, and what I came up with, I think, is the correct answer, and that is that they are providing oversight to the earnings of this part of the sales tax, the 1/8%, the projected $800,000 a year. So how that $800,000 is spent as opposed to the full town budget, which is what the Finance Committee is dealing with. So their charter is a smaller part of the town's revenue. Am I answering your question?
Okay, further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Fago. I have no more cards on this item. Would anybody else from the public wish to address us on this item? Seeing nobody coming forward, I will close the public testimony and come back to council for more questions or a motion. Comments? Councilmember Sack?
I just want to make sure I understand, so I apologize to town staff if I'm repeating myself. The way the ballot language is, where it identifies the priorities for roads, for police, essential services, those in many ways are specific. We're asking people to fund those services, and then we have a little clause that then says for general. And I understand if you remove that general clause, it's still not a specific tax, because why?
So let me start, and the assistant will join me here. I think it might be helpful for me to read the ballot language in its entirety so you have the full context of what it is. It's important to note that this is a measure to fund essential town services such as, so it's clearly setting forth examples, maintaining neighborhood police patrols, improving traffic flow to reduce congestion, repairing potholes, fixing neighborhood streets, maintaining the town's long-term financial stability, i.e. pensions and other things we care about, and other unrestricted general revenue purposes. So it's all part of that same phrase. And then it goes on to say, by enacting a 0.125% sales tax for 20 years, providing about $800,000 annually, it's an estimate, requiring independent citizens' oversight with public review of spending and all revenues controlled locally. So essentially that is the ballot language. It's not an either or. It's not, we have to pick traffic congestion or police or something else. The ordinance very clearly says whereas, traffic congestion, and whereas we care about quality of life and we care about all these other things. So I think the ballot is very clear that these are examples of the types of general revenue purposes for which a town provides services. And I'll let Assistant Town Manager Andrews add anything more.
No, I think that sums it up perfectly. The way the ballot language is crafted, it does show the types of things that we would do. It's not a specific list, and that's the key difference between a general tax and a specific tax. This says these are items that are important to the community, but we can also use it for any other unrestricted general revenue purpose.
If I could follow up with a question while she's probably thinking up her next one. In our, let's see, this is our addendum. It's hard to tell you what page. It's actually 4 of 6 of item number 4, Finance Committee report. I'm sorry if this is confusing. I'll just tell you where I'm going. It talks, at that time we're working on language, and it gave an example of one for the City of Campbell sales tax measure, which sounds very similar to ours. It says, in order to maintain and protect city services and facilities such as city streets, pothole repair, fire protection, 9/11, emergency medical service, police patrols, neighborhood watch, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sounds very similar to ours. This was a 2008 measure. Did this pass? Was it a specific tax or a general tax? And how is it the implementation been going in Campbell? Has there been any issues with it? And did they have an oversight committee?
Thank you. So the Campbell general tax, it was a general tax, did pass. It's a tax. They're one of 2 entities that went ahead and tried to get a tax specific for their communities and their residents. The other one is San Jose, and that passed also. The examples here kind of show you the way ballot language, it was intended to illustrate how ballot language is different between a special tax and a general tax, because when the Finance Committee first started deliberating this, they weren't sure which direction they were going to go in. They ultimately focused on a general tax, but at the beginning, we provided samples of language for both.
Okay, so effectively this language worked. Okay.
Correct. And there's other examples of general tax language here, and you'll notice all of them kind of identify areas that were probably important to their communities at that time, but then they also go on to state, and especially now because ballot language, the regulations around it have gotten tighter and tighter, and now ballot language is very specific. You have to have something that references unrestricted general revenue. You have to have language that shows an estimated amount of what you think you'll receive annually. You have to end it with saying be adopted so that it's clear to the voting public that this is something that you're being asked to deliberate on and either adopt or not adopt. And so this is very consistent with language that's been used in the past, and yet it's also current from a regulatory standpoint.
Okay. Any further questions? Councilmember Jensen.
Just following up on the Oversight Committee, et cetera, discussion. Because this is proposing a general tax, which becomes part of the revenue for the town, the general revenue for the town, Mr. Fagot suggested that the $800,000 would somehow be separate. It will not be separate, correct? It will go into the general fund and be examined just like the Finance Committee and the staff and the council examines any kind of general revenue for the fund, for the town, correct?
That's true. So it does go into our general revenue. Section 2.60.140 on page 7 of 9 of the draft ordinance identifies the role of the Oversight Committee. And if this ordinance should pass, a future action of this committee, of this council, will be to identify the number, the qualifications, and duties of the committee members, which will then be established by either ordinance or resolution of the town council. They are being asked to report on the revenues received from the tax and the expenditures, and those same items would also be subject to annual audits. So it is not intended that they would be helping the council with prioritization. The Finance Committee is distinct in that it is really helping with our CAFR, pensions, et cetera. So it also has a very clear and separate role.
So when and if this tax is passed as a general tax, the Finance Committee will do what it's already doing.
Correct.
And the council will do what it's already doing with respect to setting priorities. And as you indicated in the ballot language, what it's doing is setting forth a list of possible examples for expenditures that have the same controls that all the other possible expenditures we have contain, right? Okay.
Okay, no. Councilmember Sack.
Okay, maybe, and I apologize, because maybe I'm just looking at this a little too simplistically. So, following what has just happened, we had a town budget discussion, and we showed that within there we balanced a budget, and we have $700,000 in surplus, and in November we may be looking at $3 million to further distribute into their funds. And then we have documents that show, but we have potentially $70 million in unfunded infrastructure costs. We know we have unfunded liabilities, and this is why we're asking for a tax measure to help fund those future costs. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around, if I'm the average person that's not studying these documents, how do you reconcile a budget discussion that happened 2 weeks ago that was positive, and now we're looking at hundreds of millions in potential unfunded costs? And I can't reconcile those two within a 2-week period.
So basically, the council has done a lot of hard work over the years. So we've invested a lot to bring down our pension obligations, as has been documented in previous meetings. You've balanced a budget. You've identified how much of previous years of surplus you want to invest in roads and in infrastructure. And for that reason, we have a pretty important capital improvement program moving forward. So a budget is essentially a plan. So what is our plan for 18-19? So we have a balanced plan where the revenues coming in will essentially equate to the expenditures that go out. We're going to be making strategic investments that will help our asset base, et cetera. At the end of this fiscal year, which ends on June 30th, we project that we will have a slight surplus from our last budget. That means that we have salary savings. That means maybe we didn't spend as much on some of our capital projects. And so that surplus will then go into a future budget discussion that the council will have. So we are essentially taking care of the town's daily needs, providing police, providing library services, having council meetings. We've got a budget to essentially do that. We also have a budget to do a few special things, like paying down our pensions and doing Almond Grove. But what we don't have is money to do more special things. So by having a tax on the ballot, it gives the council revenue flexibility that could be used in the event of a downturn, or in the event that we find another big project such as Almond Grove that we want to fund, or it could be just the maintenance of services when the economy does soften a little bit. So they are very distinct. It's really, one is a budget and a plan, and the other is, if we want to look in the long term, what are some of our other needs? So it's by recognizing that we have infrastructure needs, it's a liability in a different sense. It's essentially saying we have more things that we want to spend money on than we have money. It's a different kind of liability than, say, the pension, where we actually have a plan and we're paying down those pension liabilities.
And I would just ask, during the last budget discussion, there was actually a significant conversation around what would it take to get our PCI up to 70. And during the course of that conversation, our town engineer and assistant director of Parks and Public Works said it would probably be somewhere in the vicinity of, we need an extra $1 million. During that budget discussion, we didn't have an extra $1 million. But if we did, that's one area where we could have possibly put some additional revenue, and that would have gotten us to that 70 PCI number sooner. And so these aren't items that if it doesn't happen, the town is in disrepair. As the town manager just said, you adopt a budget every year to make sure that we maintain the highest quality services that we can provide to our community. But time and again, we have conversations that if we had a little more revenue, we could probably provide more to our community.
Okay, so I really like that explanation right there. So why then can't we then have ballot language that follows that? We've identified these are our wish list. We've identified we need this amount of money. And right there, that was a perfect example. We identified another $1 million to raise our PCI. This could potentially give us $800,000. Why can't we write the ballot language to identify that specific need? And without necessarily removing all the others, but just striking that general clause, why can't we do that?
And I'm afraid that would have transpired during a discussion of specific tax versus general. In a general tax, one of the reasons we keep it at a high level is because on any given year, the council might want to focus on trying to get that extra $800,000 for PCI. In another year, a council might want to focus on if we could just do another $800,000 towards our pension obligations. In another year, it could be a different priority. And so that's why in the general tax, we identify areas that are currently relevant and important not only to the council but to the community. But when you start to move into that specificity, it will be dedicated to PCI, then that is a specific tax.
If I may.
Go ahead.
And I don't mean to be argument. I want to make sure I understand this. But whether it's PCI, whether it's unfunded liabilities, those were areas already in this ballot language that we've identified our priorities. Again, if you strike that clause, you still have that flexibility of that $800,000 of the financial health. You still have the street improvements. You still have public safety. Is
She's
that-
talking about the clause the attorney told us we must have in there for it to be a general
Thank
tax.
you. I was going to ask to clarify, if you're asking about striking other unrestricted general revenue purposes,
Exactly.
that would not be recommended in current regulatory environment for a general tax. It's one of the ways that we make it very clear to our community that we're being very transparent, that while these are areas that are currently identified as priorities, ultimately it is money that would flow to the general fund, like our property tax and our current other sales taxes, and it could be used for any purpose in the future.
And I think this is my last question. So by striking that clause, it's no longer a general. By striking that clause, does it then become a specific and raise us to a 2/3? Or is there some different pathway to get to a specific
There
tax?
is a different pathway, and we kind of took that fork in the road a few months ago when we were discussing, do we want a specific or a general? And this council said we wanted a general. So we did our due diligence by actually hiring outside counsel to make sure our ballot language was current and met all of the requirements. And we were advised specifically that we had to have that language in there. So since we took that path in the road a few months ago saying, yes, we want a general, then even our outside attorneys advised that we have to acknowledge that this is for general purposes. And that is being very transparent to the community, that ultimately they have an elected body called our town council that will make the very best decisions for this community.
Councilmember Spector?
Let me follow up on what Ms. Sayak was just asking. I'm looking at the proposed ballot language, and is there some reason that the fact that these monies can be used for general purposes is not included there as opposed to somewhere else?
My apologies. Are you looking at the ballot language or are you looking at the ordinance?
I'm looking at the ballot language.
So the ballot language is not before you tonight. That was adopted by resolution last time, and if the council wants to rescind that, that's going to take a vote of 4/5 of the council. So the item before you tonight is the second reading of the ordinance pertaining to the sales tax and its purpose.
And I do understand that. In fact, I understand it perfectly. But since in response to other questions being asked by other members of the council, this concept of specific tax, general tax, how we, the council, are being transparent by having this language, and so about general tax or specific tax or specific expenditures, is there some way we could even be more transparent?
Transparent in the ordinance?
Actually, in both.
Okay, well, I think we've got, again, we brought the ballot language to you at our last meeting. It was adopted with a couple of edits from the council. So I think it's, and we do have a very strong word limit. I think we've covered essentially the issues that have been identified as being important to the community. Essential town services, we give specific examples, and then we also provide room for flexibility with future councils. So I think we've got a pretty good language. If I think otherwise procedurally we would need to have a vote to essentially re-agendize this, which would probably cause us to have a special meeting during the summer, so that way we can keep on track with the schedule for the Register of Voters.
Question, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please go ahead.
The ballot language in response to Councilwoman Spector does say other unrestricted general revenue purposes, which is a different way of saying, yes, it's a general expenditure. That phrase is farther down in the paragraph. I'm wondering whether that phrase could be put up front. Essential town services and unrestricted general revenue purposes for essential town purposes such as blah, 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 which wouldn't change the word count, but which would convey the same thing, but which might make certain members of the council feel more comfortable about it. And if that was part of a suggestion, would that be an editorial change, or would that be a rescission of the ballot language requiring a 4/5 vote and a special meeting?
Okay. We're going to try and consult with our town attorney and get a response.
If procedurally it's not an issue, I don't see why bringing it to the fore, from our perspective, would matter.
I'll send that question. I understand it to be simply reordering the language, the exact same language, but reordered. Is that right?
That's my question, because what I'm hearing from at least two council people is a degree of discomfort with the ballot language such that it's not clear that it's a list of examples that is part of a general revenue discretionary funding, which is a general tax. And what I don't have no idea whether they would be more comfortable with putting the phrase that says unrestricted general revenue purposes up front or not. So I don't know if it's, but I'm interested in the answer to the question.
And so let me ask, just to be clear, so we're talking about changing something that's not on the agenda tonight, which means we would definitely have to agendize a change. We couldn't just do a 4/5 vote tonight. We'd have to agendize it for another meeting. If we decide moving the same words around doesn't require 4/5 votes, then that could be something voted on tonight.
So procedurally, if the town attorney says that this is, within editorial license of the approval given earlier in June, then we're probably fine. If he feels that, other council members may want, and the public might want to see it in its new form, then I would imagine he would say, first you need a vote for reconsidering the resolution, and that would have to be someone who is on the prevailing side of the resolution to make that motion, and then we would need to count, and that would need to pass by 4/5. We would then need to set up the special meeting so you could, in fact, reconsider it, and then we could bring back the revised ballot language. But we're waiting to hear from the town attorney.
And Mr. Mayor, just to be clear to everyone, my statement is a question. It's not a motion.
I understand. I didn't hear a motion.
Okay.
I didn't ask for a second.
It's my inclination is that it may be considered to be a non-substantive change if it's just rearranging the language that's there, but the voter election law, ballot law, it's such a specific area. I don't know if it could be said if you rearrange it, if it then obfuscates some meaning to the public. And I don't know if it would take, if you'd have to rescind your resolution because you did approve it as it was written.
Okay, how about another procedural question? Is it possible for us to continue this item to after item 16 or 17?
Absolutely.
And give us time for
research?
Yes, that's a great idea.
Would any council member wish to make that motion?
So moved.
Okay, so I have a motion and a second, and I think I said after item 16. I assume that's what you're going for. So any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any noes? Okay, passes unanimously. We'll continue this item until after item 16. So with that, we will go to item 15, please.
Good evening. Matt Morley, Director of Parks and Public Works. This is another ballot item. This one is a protest ballot having to do with our landscape and lighting assessment districts. Our landscape and lighting assessment districts were set up to provide enhanced levels of maintenance at specific areas. And on an annual basis, we poll the property owners for the opportunity to protest the assessment that is done on their property tax rolls. We have a specific process that we follow to do so, and they have mail-in ballots that they have the opportunity to send in to us, or they have the opportunity to be present here tonight to protest. And should they protest, the council would have the opportunity to reconsider the assessments. We've received no protests from property owners, as is typical, and that concludes my report. We're here to support any conversation.
Okay, any questions from council members? Seeing none at this time, I will open the public testimony. Would any member of the public wish to address us on this item? I have no cards. Seeing nobody coming forward, I will close public testimony, come back to council for questions or a motion. Councilmember Jensen?
I will make a motion that we adopt the resolutions that are listed in 1 through 6 of our staff report on page 2.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Seeing none, it passes unanimously. Thank you. Let's move on to item number 16. To the relief of some people in the back of the room, I'm sure.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. Before you tonight is the recommendation to receive the Arts and Cultural Commission's Public Benefit Assessment for Art Study and provide direction on the Commission's recommendation to prepare an ordinance designating 0.5% of all private building projects with total construction costs of greater than $200,000 for funding public arts programs in town. The Arts and Cultural Commission has been working on a strategic arts plan since 2015. One of the identified goals of that plan was researching a source of ongoing funding for public arts. That study and recommendation of the Commission contained here tonight is the result of that work. To present the study and its conclusions, I will turn the floor over to Arts and Cultural Commission Chair Kapon Javi.
Thank you. Is our Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Maureen Kapon-Javi. I'm the chair of the Arts and Culture Commission. And I'm actually really excited to be here finally after a number of years to present this recommendation to the council to fund public art in our town and to take you through some of the highlights or the broad overview of the assessment recommendation. And then in your packets, you have all the details of the study. But what I'd like to do is begin with by just reading out a letter that you've already received from one of our council members, and I think it was a really well-written letter, and it kind of sets up what we wanted to talk about, so I'm going to read an excerpt. And this is from Michael Miller, who's one of our new commissioners. Public art matters, according to the Americans for the Arts, because the purpose of public art is not only to enrich the community and improve our quality of life through its ability to enrich an environment, but also to ignite the imagination, encourage thought, and to prompt discourse. Cities gain value through public art, cultural, social, and economic value. Public art is a distinguishing part of our public history and of our evolving culture. It reflects and reveals our society. It adds meaning to our cities and uniqueness to our communities. Public art humanizes the built environment and invigorates public spaces. It provides an intersection between past, present, and future, between disciplines, and between ideas. The Knight Foundation Soul of the Community initiative surveyed 43,000 people in 43 cities and found that social offerings, openness and welcomeness, and importantly, the aesthetics of a place, its art, parks, and green spaces, ranks higher than education, safety, and the local economy as a driver of attachment. So let's just kind of take us through what we already know. In January 2016, the Town Council approved the Art Commission Strategic Plan. That was actually begun in 2015. At that time, the Council also allotted funds to begin the plan implementation. And our strategic plan is in 3 parts. We have 3 goals. Goal 1 is to develop public art in the town, to find ways to fund public art projects, and then to engage and conduct more outreach in the town for art and cultural topics and initiatives. $5,000 was allocated by the council to conduct a public art research study, and we also conducted a public art survey on the side. The public benefit assessment public art research study was started in August of 2017, and in January 2018, the research study and public art survey were completed. We studied 23 cities, and a consultant was hired by the town for this, by the way. 23 cities were studied, cities from across the United States and many in California. Cities with populations of over 300,000, medium-sized cities between 100,000 and 300,000, and small cities, 100,000 population or less. Again, these are highlights of the report. 80% of those 23 cities studied have a public and or a private percentage for art ordinance. The most common fee schedule or funding mechanism was a percentage of the cost of private and or public development and construction projects of these 23 cities studied. And of those, the percentage for art ordinances averaged 1% of total construction costs. So that's what was allocated as a result of these ordinances being put into place. Nearly all percentage for art ordinances were created through council votes. Public vote was not required to pass the ordinance, and the public was notified of the proposed ordinance through required public notice process, just to give you an idea of what the process was. Finally, I just want to give you the top line results and recommendation that the Art Council is recommending based on the study and reviewing the cities and looking at all the questions and netting it down to a few key points. The Town of Los Gatos, the Arts Council recommends that the Town of Los Gatos Council pass a public benefit assessment for public art, designating 0.5% of total construction costs of private development and construction projects greater than $200,000. The Arts Council believes that the positive experience of the communities studied can also be realized by the Town of Los Gatos in its own quest to promoting arts and cultural enrichment in our town. Establishing a development funding model for private construction projects will be in line with similar programs in other communities that we have studied. It will also, this is important, it will also meet the demand on a multi-year basis to fund public art projects. Thank you.
Okay, let's see if there's any questions. I'll start off with one, I guess. So the threshold you've set here at this $200K for private projects seems much more aggressive than any of the other example cities in your table. For example, 200K is probably going to hit a number of people's single home remodels. Was it the intention to be charging single home remodels? When I look at most of the examples for private projects, they have thresholds like commercial over 10,000 square feet or construction of residences that are 5 or more, for example. That was the Palo Alto one. The Cupertino one has similar, any development over 50,000 square feet kind of thing. So when I read these, most of them look like they're really going after big projects, not homeowners trying to do remodels. So was this considered?
Yes, we did consider it. One of the first things we considered was the average, which was 1%. And so we decided to go lower and suggest 0.5%. So that equals, I think that's $500 per every $100,000 project. So if you had a $200,000 remodel or construction, you would be paying $1,000 in a percentage for art. And the other consideration there is you're going to be remodeling once, maybe every 10 years or 20 years. This isn't something that you're going to be paying on an ongoing basis. It's a one-off. When you consider this assessment in the context of all of the fees that are associated with the cost of a construction project, it's quite small. So so it's $1,000 for every $100,000. It's a $1,000 assessment.
Okay. Looks like Councilmember Jensen has a question.
Just wanted to follow up on that. Have you had an opportunity to look at the addendum that we got tonight? Has charts of projected
a little
costs.
bit. Yes, not in detail, but I think I understand the gist.
So one of the things it says is new non-hillside home costs $241 per square foot, 829 square foot home. You may or may not be familiar with the debate that the council had earlier this year on accessory dwelling units and what's required by the state. We had a debate upon how big could your unit be so that you could accommodate your family, so that you could have your parents move in, various factors to allow that, and we went up to 1,200 square feet. So one of the goals, obviously, of the accessory dwelling unit is to make that an affordable project. How do you think adding $1,000 or $2,000 to that project would affect the affordability?
Well, again, I think when I look at all what makes up the cost of the construction of a project, I think the town has 17 pages of fees and assessments that are attached to projects that are charged to developers or people looking to build a home or remodel a home. So when you look at 17 pages of fees and you look at how all those add up, 0.5% of that total is, I think, really what the view is.
Go ahead.
Just to follow up on the same addendum, the chart breaks out some of those fees. For an example, so it gives Hillside Home with a valuation of $2.5 million. Building permit fees $61,000 plus almost $62,000. Traffic impact fee $8,779. School impact fee, which builds school rooms, etc., $10,488. Art fee, $12,233. Do you think that an art fee should be higher than a school impact and traffic fee?
Well, if I go back to what the Knight Foundation found out, a lot of people believe that public art or the enhancement of aesthetics of a community is more valuable than safety and traffic and those other fees. So personally, yes.
Okay, so I was listening carefully when you described that Knight report, and you said more important, quote, for attachment, unquote, which is different than, do I want my house to be safe? Do I want less traffic, etc.? So was it, quote, for attachment, unquote?
Well, let me read it again. Social offerings, openness and welcomeness, and importantly, the aesthetics of a place, its art, parks, and green spaces, ranked higher than education, safety, and the local economy as a driver of attachment. And so if I look at driver of attachment, I'm interpreting it as a place for me to stay and live and grow and raise my family and spend my money and pay my taxes. So that's how I would define attachment. So what's going to anchor me here?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, further questions? Okay, seeing none. So this is part of staff. I mean, it's a little confusing for me because I've got a member of the public that we just asked questions of, but I have an open public testimony. So I guess at this point, I could council members want to ask other questions of staff. Seeing none, then I would go to open the public testimony. Thank you, Ms. Kapanjavi. Okay, so first up for this item, I have Amy Fastnacht.
Good evening. I'm Amy Fosnot. I'm a member of the Arts Commission. So you may have noticed over the past 10 years or so that the Arts Commission in Los Gatos really has not accomplished a whole lot. I mean, some small projects we've done, but really nothing that could define the town as a center for the arts. We on the Arts Commission are enthusiastic and dedicated, and we want to change that. But we need two things to do that: money and political support. So the first thing we attacked was money, and we did this study to find out how do other communities like us do their art programs. And it was pretty clear what the answer was. This is it. So if you would like to have an arts commission that really can do great things in the town, this is what we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none. We do have a question for you, Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. I want to follow up on what was being said with the prior speaker. What is your sense, or what is your input when you look at the amount of monies that would be generated by your recommendation versus the other costs for the other things like traffic fee, school impact fee, et cetera?
Well, I may not be representing the Arts Commission total view when I answer it, but I think the specifics are negotiable. We're proposing this, but the specifics are negotiable. You know, we need your input on what an appropriate amount and level is. This is just our proposal.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Ms. Fashnot. Next up, Tom Spilsbury.
Mr. Mayor, Council, I've been on the Arts Commission for, I think, about 8 or 9 years, and I've been involved with every facet of the Arts Commission, I think, that is there, and we've been fighting hard to bring and promote public art in Los Gatos, which doesn't have much of a public arts program. You go across the United States, Cleveland, Ohio has a better arts program than Los Gatos, which is a bankrupt city. There's all kinds of cities across the United States that are funded by similar proposals like we're asking. Some of the things that we've done that have been great, though, is the utility boxes, the art mural project for the utility boxes. And I want to tell you, when I drive by those things and I see the one on over near Old Town with the cats looking through the posies, or the ones that down in across from Courtside with the view of the bay, or the guy up on top of the mountain at the end of Oka Road, or the bicycle on Blossom Hill and North Santa Cruz Avenue, it makes you smile. And I've had so many people come up to me and say, "What a great thing. Who did that?" I said, "Well, the council's put money together to do that." And they go, "That is great." And whether they like me or hate me, they love the public art. And I think it's something that really binds us all together. And we're really doing us a good service to our community by helping getting that elevated out in the public. The public wants it. We did several surveys at the farmers market, in front of Safeway, in front of Lenardi's, which are all part of our records, and everybody was really for this type of program. We had nobody who was really against any of it. The people who will be paying for these are not economically strapped people. People who are buying houses in Los Gatos and building extra houses for their family members in their backyards are not necessarily economically strapped people. You can't be living in Los Gatos necessarily anymore and be economically strapped. That's just a fact. As to the costs that are associated on this 2-page memo, this is just a small portion. I'm in the real estate business. When you do a pro forma for a real estate developer, 35% of the cost of a house is basically dedicated to fees, cost of construction, drawings, architectural drawings, studies, you name it. 35%. So half of 1% of 35% is minuscule. Any contractor or developer worth their salt also has a 15% profit margin. If they get 14.5 versus 15, it's not going to kill them, quite frankly.
Thank you. Let's see if you have any questions. Okay, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Spilsbury. Next up, I have Ellis Weaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I appreciate your allowing me to speak on behalf of the assessment report. You've allowed me to be on this commission for 3 years, and I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed the experience because it's doing something that's really right for our community. I don't think if you really look at the numbers and you realize that the assessments that you've seen on this particular sheet, they're just the tip of the iceberg. When you go about building anything, whether it's and I've renovated my house, but if you also have a development where you have multiple houses, there's a lot more expense than what you see here. And so the 0.5% really is pretty minimal. But I think what Amy said was true. We are not fixed in our request. We would like to negotiate. But clearly, when you look at other places in the country, if you've traveled any degree at all, you'll find there's a lot more art than we have. I mean, I was astounded to find places like Sacramento, Santa Cruz, Cupertino. There is just great public art, and it's right near us. You can drive around and look at it. I would encourage you to take this as a serious move on our part as a commission to have a long-term plan to develop art in our town. It's not going to happen if we get sporadic small amounts from the council every year. It's not going to happen. And it is important to have something that's attractive to businesses as well as people who live here, people who want to move here and buy houses. It's part of our fabric is to have good and very, kind of art that we're proud of. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's see if you have any questions. Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Weaker. I have no more cards. Would any other member of the public wish to speak to us on this item? Seeing nobody coming forward, I will close the public testimony, come back to council for questions or a motion. Well, let me start off with the first question. If we pass something like this, would this give us any budget relief? So, for example, we give out art grants of $100,000, or I can't remember what the number is, something like that, out of our general fund. So would this be able to replace that and give our budget relief? And where else might it give our budget relief?
So the funds would be for arts, and that would be discretionary in terms of where those will be placed. In terms of the arts grants, that would be I would see that as being something that would be a qualification for using those funds. So that would be a possibility where those could be applied. In terms of really, it would be at the discretion of council, but anything art related would probably also qualify for that. Funds that were currently given for instance, the wraps of the utility boxes and whatnot may fall under this also. That would also be at the council discretion as to whether those would be applied. But it is conceivable that that there are some general funds now that could be replaced with this fee.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Jensen.
Just a follow-up to that question and a different question altogether. Given the discussion that we just had on the general versus specific tax, if the council were to pass something like this, what I'm hearing from the Arts Commission is we want it for public art. They clearly have a concept of what that is. The grants we give out for all kinds of things, theater, various things, the Chamber of Commerce comes in, they want something. What I hear is public art, and clearly the Arts Commission thinks they know what that is. And what you're talking about is the council can decide how to spend that, and that's, I don't believe, their concept. Can you help me out with their concept as you understand it from working with them?
So in discussions that I've had with the commission and the subcommittee, I think the general idea of arts could include performing arts, murals, that the grants would fall under that in terms of performances, theater, all those types of things. They did say public art in their recommendation proposal, and that choice of wording, I think, conjures up particular images of statues and murals and whatnot. But from the discussions that they have had in their meetings, I think it was more far-reaching than that.
And a totally separate question. Speakers were talking about projects that the Arts Commission has brought forward. And when we had a discussion, and the council had the discussion about giving money to various things, when that was, there was a gateway project that at least I understood I was giving money for. And can you tell me where that gateway project is?
Yes, the Commission is currently working on the gateway. Right at this particular moment, they have an RFQ, which they have in a draft form, which, depending on the way that the council might move on this item tonight, they held back on to get a little bit more information on where they should go. They have a couple different directions that they could move with that RFQ for the gateway. One in terms of the design for a more encompassing design that would be for several gateways across the city, but would not actually be able to fund the construction using the money that was allocated to them, or to use the money that was allocated to them for a smaller, for instance, single gateway, or because they wouldn't be able to, the funding was not enough to do several of them. So part of holding back on having that RFQ before you tonight or previously was because the Commission wanted to see where you might weigh in on this particular issue, if there would be additional funding that would be an ongoing source that would be applied to the gateway and other projects.
Thank you.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Going back to an issue that was raised a few minutes ago, I was under the impression, and I thought I read it in the staff report, that the Arts Commission, their image of the process would be they would evaluate art, come up with a decision, make a recommendation, then ultimately the council would make the ultimate call. Is that what the process is entailed, or is it something else?
There was an arts policy that was put into place, and according to that, and I do not have the date of that arts policy, but it was put into place that when a public art project, for instance, a sculpture, a mural, something of this nature, would be brought forward, that it would come through the Commission, and then it would be brought before council. Council would have that final decision on whether or not that would move forward in that particular state.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's remind us what your question to the council is and what our next steps are. So you're basically looking for some recommendation. Do we want to move ahead with this? What kind of ideas would we put in an ordinance if yes? And then we would need a nexus study. Would that before we decide on an ordinance, or is that kind of decided tonight also? And you're saying 20,000 would be needed for a nexus study?
We understand that about 20,000 would be required for a nexus study or associated other costs that may be legal analysis and whatnot if we're moving forward to make sure that we've got our T's crossed and our I's dotted. All those things are in order. What the staff is asking for tonight is to receive the Arts and Cultural Commission's report and then to provide direction moving forward. So that direction could either be in terms of the recommendation of the Commission looks favorable and you'd like us to start the next steps to develop some type of ordinance, to do the studies and the preliminary work towards that. Or that the council would be not in favor of that, in which case we would nothing more would be required, or that the council might have a different take on the direction in which something like this could go.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. And I'm going to make a motion that we move forward with the recommendation in the staff report as stated by Mr. Baker. And just wanted to thank the efforts of the Arts Commission and their hard work and dedication. And I have watched you come to us year after year looking for money and us not always giving you adequate money compared to what other communities are receiving. So I look at this as an opportunity to at least explore the idea of a mechanism that will bring forth the possibility of more public art. If you look at the surrounding communities, I think we've fallen behind on it. I do appreciate the utility boxes. Those are great, but I think we can do more. The Art Bridge, of course, is great, but there could be more. And I just want to make the motion and see what happens.
Okay, I have a motion. Would anybody like to second?
I'm going to second it and say we still need work on the art bridge.
Okay, so Councilmember Jensen.
I'm a supporter of the arts. I love the arts. I would like to have more art in our community. However, I don't think this is the way to do it. We just had a big discussion about a general tax that we can use in various ways, including funding art, should the council determine to do that at its discretion. This is a way of essentially taxing a lot of things that go on in this town, and we're going to have a discussion later on about potentially changing objective standards in conjunction with state law, and state law is requiring more and more and more to make things available to all members of our community. So as Mr. Spilsbury says, our community is not economically strapped. I can tell you that people that are trying to come in, someone I know, to an accessory dwelling unit in Los Gatos, who lives in a bad area of San Jose with his 2 daughters in kindergarten and not even in school, the only way he can possibly get into this town is an accessory dwelling unit, and to add $2,000 to that cost is actually prohibitive for that person. So in terms of making things affordable, doing things that are more outreach, which art is an outreach type of thing, we should consider it as a council in discussion whether we want to spend those funds. If we get a general sales tax and we end up going forward with that and we have $800,000, great. That's a great way to spend that money. But there's a lot of things that this town needs money for. And frankly, the idea that we would tax somebody, essentially put a fee on a development more for arts than for traffic, if you listen to people in this town, they would, I think, have a fit if they found that out, is just a little bit out of proportion. I would like to see a different approach and for a valuable idea, but I think I can't support this execution of it.
I'll go ahead and make a comment, I guess. I agree somewhat with Councilmember Jensen. I actually agree that this is a good idea and that we do need to support art and we need more money for art and we need to get more art in our town. When I read the report, I come to a different conclusion, which is kind of what Councilmember Jensen was saying. I see in here both in a lot of the cities, so a lot of cities are finding ways to have dedicated revenue sources for art, which I agree with. I think that's a good idea. What I see in here, though, is limits that keep it away from basically remodels, single-family home remodels, or even the ADUs that Councilmember Jensen is worried about. I also see a lot of the towns using their own construction, 1% for their own construction. We don't do a lot of our own, so that's probably not that relevant anyway to leave out. I would be more comfortable if we had, and I don't know the exact numbers, but the current threshold I'm not comfortable with, something closer to the Palo Alto one that's in here that says 1% for commercial developments. You can make it 0.5%. I'm flexible. But the key is they have to be over 10,000 square feet or construction value over 200,000. And then that residence projects with 5 units or more. Okay, I might be okay with 2 or 3, but I'm not sort of comfortable with any project over 200,000 because we start dipping into too many things. Even the Cupertino one is I think I like the Palo Alto one better, so I probably will not support the motion as made. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually agree with everything everybody has said. The thing is that at this point, is the proposal perfect? Probably not. We've heard some good ideas. But on the other hand, if we don't start moving forward, the Arts Commission has worked on this a long time. And I wanted to say there's some really good substantive work in here. So thank you. So they've worked on it a really long time. And if we just say, well, we don't agree with you, and then what? send them back to the drawing board, have us go back to the drawing board. They've worked on it a long time. The artwork in Los Gatos is fairly minimal, good, but fairly minimal. So I would be open to suggestions for modification of this motion, but to tell the town, to tell the Arts Commission, we don't like this, do something else, I'm not prepared to do that.
Go ahead, Councilmember Sack.
Okay, so if I could ask staff two questions. The first is, as I mentioned in our report, Senator Wachowski's bill on 831 on accessory dwelling units, it removes all local fees. So regardless of what we do, whether it's 2%, 5%, or 0.5 or 0.2, if that bill passes, we cannot, this would be one of those fees that could not be imposed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so I just wanted to make that absolutely clear, like state law is going to preempt us on that. But that bill is only for accessory dwelling units. Second question, process-wise, a nexus study has to move forward. In that nexus study, do we have to clarify the the dollar thresholds that we're looking at?
It would be helpful. Otherwise, the consultant is going to have a very wide universe to work from. So to the extent that council could provide a little bit more direction, such as where the mayor was starting to go, that would be helpful. So that way, as we do the Nexus study, we can test different options.
Okay. And so what I'll do is I'll just share my thoughts as well. So I'm supportive of the concept and the idea. I believe an assessment I think it would be one way to enhance. I'm all in favor of the commercial. What I do hesitate about is the residential, because at this current threshold, it does cover the accessory dwelling units and other residential components that we are trying to improve that helps affordability. So I will oppose the current motion, but I look forward to another motion that amends it so that we could at least raise that threshold or provide a modification so that as we look at accessory dwelling units, it somehow falls below that.
Okay, further comments? Seeing, okay, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So it's my understanding that we were just going to potentially move forward with this recommendation. This isn't all set in stone. There's going to be a study, and there'll be future ordinance, and then the council would be voting at that time. I would be inclined to take the hard work of the Arts Commission at this point in time, and not necessarily dissect it so much. There were great points made about ADUs and some other things. There's some outstanding legislation out there at the state level, but I think this is just a very preliminary or very initial recommendation, and just move it forward and see what the study comes back as, and then see from there we'll be discussing the ordinance and what we should do. And by that time, I'm not sure when that will be, but we'll have more information. I again want to recognize the efforts of the Arts Commission. I know they did their homework on this. It's very, very thorough, and considered a lot of things. So I'm sticking with my original motion.
Give us a minute to think about it, or let me think about it. So I guess the seconder of the motion entertained modifications to the motion. I guess I will ask the seconder, or ask the maker of the motion to modify it to say commercial over 200,000 and I'm not quite sure how to say it, but right. That's what I ultimately said. This is to the maker of the motion. Friendly amendment to make it commercial over 200,000, or I'm debating here. kind of looking for more help from other council members if they're interested, but I would almost say no remodels, but I'm not sure all new homes should get hit with it either, or maybe the amount could be less for new homes. Maybe it's, so what if we said, okay, let me suggest commercial over 200,000, kind of thinking on my feet here, and does not affect remodels on residential, and affects new homes over, well, they're all going to be over 200,000. So, but we make it 0.25% instead of 0.5% on new homes, single new homes, and we make it 0.5% for multiple home projects. This is kind of random off the top of my head, so I'm open to changes. Any interest at all in this friendly amendment, Vice Mayor?
Well, I appreciate the friendly amendment. The only problem is there's just so much information being introduced. And again, the Arts Commission went out and they did their research, and they brought us examples, and they brought us justifications, and they showed us what other communities are doing. And I mean, I would be interested in just saying, okay, this is what they came up with for now. Let's see what the study comes back as, and then let's see what the ordinance comes back as, because what you're bringing forth is, well, let's try 0.25% here, and let's say 500,000 here, or this and that, and it all sounds reasonable, but it may not even be reasonable. I would be more interested in seeing what the study is, because we might come back as like, well, you might have only raised $1,000 by doing this.
Let me try wording my friendly amendment a different way. Rather than giving specifics in my friendly amendment, let me word it as, rather than taking the exact threshold in this, we ask staff to go off and come back with a suggestion in their ordinance that makes sure that we don't affect remodels and reduces the effect on single-family new homes. And then leave it up to staff to. Councilmember Stack.
Just a question on the Nexus study. So could you explain to me what the Nexus study will look at? Does it look at feasibility? Does it look at whether, first let's start with that. What does the Nexus study actually look at?
Sure. So I think I might even be able to help advise you get where you want to go, because I think I can tell where you want to go. So the progeny of case law regarding a Nexus study said basically if you have an exaction, a monetary fee, or some kind of a request for land, you must donate land to do it for a certain purpose. If that is applied on a particularized or ad hoc basis to a project, it receives the most heightened scrutiny of Nexus study. That's that one-off. This particular project where I want you to do X, that's going to be really looked at. The Supreme Court disavows that strongly. If you have what this is asking for, which is a legislative change that will apply generally to all developments of a certain category or of every category, depending on how you want to go with it, but if it applies generally, then you still have to come up with whether it's a money or a taking of property, you have to come up with a rational relation between the fee or the taking that's imposed and the impact you're trying to improve. So that is the nature of the Nexus study. In a nutshell, it is this money that you're asking of the developer going to ameliorate the impact you're trying to ameliorate? There is a third way of accomplishing an art for impact fee, which is where you require the actual installation of art. You might put design standards on it, and those can be done in your police powers. That doesn't have to require any kind of a Nexus study. Or you can give the option of an in lieu fee. So those are the three categories of how to get where you want to get, which is money for art. Then there's the whole analysis of what projects are you going to attach this to. There are, of all I've looked at many of the cities that were cited. Most of them are on commercial or multifamily residential. There are some that are vaguer than that, but they have parameters that suggest that they wouldn't be affecting single-family homes, much less ADUs. So you can also attack this by looking at how best should this fee get attached to what size project, what kind, just commercial and residential, just multifamily residential. That can all be explored at the staff report level to give you the options to get where you want to go. So in helping advise you with regard to that motion, if you keep the motion broader in terms of directing staff to look at what are the ways you can get the art for impact fee accomplished, and what are the pros and cons of it in terms of whether it's going to engender a nexus study, whether that's a heightened scrutiny, whether it's not. Because I do believe the Supreme Court's been silent with regard to whether legislative change triggers this nexus fee, but the way it's been applied so far is that there's still at a minimum, a nexus study rather, at a minimum, it does require a rational relation examination. So it's really kind of the same thing. But if you keep your direction broad here and just mention, or just rather direct us to analyze for you the legality of these fees, what they trigger if you impose them, and on what size project you want it to look at, whether you want it to only be residential over a certain number of units or just commercial, whatever. I think then that would kind of let us cover all the bases for you in our staff report back to you.
Let's go with Vice Mayor first.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So, question for the attorney. What if, I think what the Arts Commission was trying to do here was to bring some fairness with this $200,000 number, rather than say, why doesn't the town just increase their development fees across the board by 0.5%, and then they'll have more money, and then they can give us that 0.5% through a town ordinance. It says every year we're going to give you this much money. So that might be another way of achieving it. But I think with the $200,000 number, they were looking for some fairness aspect, where if you were doing a kitchen remodel or whatever, putting on a roof or whatever, you wouldn't be subject to the fee. When you think in terms of dollars, what does a remodel cost in Los Gatos? I'm sure people spend $1 million on a remodel pretty easy. Then you have to say to yourself, how many projects are being built commercially? Well, yes, we have the North 40 coming along. I don't know if they'd be subject to this or not. But there's not a whole lot of opportunities compared to, say, a San Jose or a Palo Alto, where they have many more multi-unit residential properties and things. So I think they were looking to sort of broaden their fishing net with the availability of funds. If we try to make it too narrow in scope, I think that could be detrimental. When it comes into the legalities of all the nexus and everything, again, as the attorney described, would it be, as I previously stated, wise to just consider increasing our development fees by 0.5%, and then perhaps adopting an ordinance that says X dollars go to the arts every year? I don't know. That might be an alternative.
And if I could just comment on that briefly, I appreciate the creativity to try and, again, find some money to do good things such as public art. Development fees have to be cost recovery in terms of covering the actual staff costs for doing the work. So we really can't increase development fees in terms of building permits, et cetera, to create extra revenue for general town purposes such as public art. Really, the impact fee or the in lieu fee approach, as mentioned by Ms. Lapros, would be the way to get an appropriate development fee for public art.
I think Councilmember Sack, you wanted to follow up before Councilmember
So
Becker.
I just wanted to follow on the Nexus study. So right now there's a motion, and it's very clean. It's based on what the Art Commission recommended. With just the 5.5% over 200,000. So the Nexus study, if this is the motion that passes, will look at that amount, what that actually can create, and whether or not it actually lands on property that we're charging this art fee on.
No, what it would do, it's not going to really do an analysis around how much revenue is going to be generated, but rather what it will do is determine, is there a reasonable relationship between a home remodel and a public art fee? Yes or no? Is there a reasonable relationship between a new office and a public art fee? So using the legal analysis as well as the threshold, then the economist or the lawyer would be able to identify what is that exact relationship. To the extent the council would like to narrow that a little bit, or at least identify to us what you'd like to not have part, then that'll be a kind of a cost efficiency, and then the consultant can really focus in on the things that you might really want to put some money.
I see.
And they can also test different thresholds
see.
if you want. And I think, what I'm hearing is that there are lots of options, and that the council would be interested to know what would that menu of options be and still meet the legal test of an impact fee.
That clarifies it. Thank you.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I said, everything that people have been saying sounds good, and there is a clean motion on the table that I seconded. However, in listening to the town attorney, my sense is if we send this clean motion to staff for the next step on the Nexus study, that we will get input on a lot of the issues that we have raised. Should we have the assessment at all? Should it cover multiple family dwellings or residential at all? My sense is we'll get the answers or input, not answers, input to the issues that we have raised with the existing clean motion.
So with that, the maker of the motion wishes to stand with your current motion.
Based on what Councilmember Spector said, is that staff's understanding of what will occur. So yes, I would like to keep the motion as it lies.
So what?
Yeah, I think if the staff recommendation is adopted, then that will allow the staff to respond with all the pros and cons of the various fees for various projects.
So that means we're not locked into the exact recommendation from the Art Commission? I mean, that's what I heard was go with the Art Commission saying we want 0.5% for everything over 200,000.
Right. So we're in the middle of a process. So right now you are at the very beginning of a process saying, this is a great idea. We want to find a dedicated revenue source for the arts. We applaud our commission for all of its great work. Go forth and do the next studies. We have a starting point. The commission is recommending development over 200,000. We have to do some analysis. And most likely our consultant will come back with a menu of some choices, and I imagine it'll go back to the commission before it would come back to the council, so that way the commission would be able to refine its own recommendation and see the results of the study. And then once we see the results of the study, we'll come back and say, do you now like the updated or the refined recommendation of the Arts Commission? Because I think we still have a long way to go before we actually write the actual ordinance. There are a lot of variables still to be considered.
Okay, Councilmember Sack.
Okay, so I appreciate the clarification. That really does help. So given the clarification, Given what is still before us in the process, I will support the motion. However, I do want to share with staff as well as the Arts Commission, my hesitation is imposing fees on accessory dwelling units and any other affordable housing projects that are coming to the town. And so if that could be incorporated into the Nexus study, I would appreciate it, and that's what I'll be looking for.
So I'll go ahead and comment, since I was saying I'm hesitant. No, I said I wasn't going to support the motion. The way we've talked through it, I will support the motion, but I can say that I won't support the recommendation if that's what the final ordinance says. I think it should not affect remodels, and I question whether it should affect new single-family homes at all. A single one of them. Multiple make more sense. You started talking about the nexus between art. So if somebody remodels their home, why does that mean we need more art in Los Gatos? I can't make a connection to that at all. And so I assume that the Nexus study is going to come back and say that we're insane to try it anyway. If somebody bulldozes and rebuilds another house in the same spot, does that require more art in town? Again, I struggle to see the connection. If somebody all of a sudden, creates a small office, now maybe it needs art in front of it, or you create, you have a PD with 5 homes in it. Now, you've got a bigger area, that may have some public parts to it. It makes sense that, yes, some more art to that, or art nearby, or in lieu somewhere else. That tends to make a lot more sense to me. It's sounding like the Nexus study is going to come back and tell us that anyway. So I'll go ahead and support the motion as is. Other comments? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
So it passes 4-1. Councilmember Jensen opposed. So at this time, it's 9:10. I suggest we take a short break for 5 to 7 minutes. Okay, if staff has been conferring, if you recall, we are bringing back item 14 now that we've finished item 6, now that we've finished item 16, and staff had been doing some research, so maybe you could start us off with some of your findings.
Thank you, Mayor. So during the break, we were able to consult with town attorney, and he advised that the resolution with the precise ballot language has been adopted, and that resolution has been signed by the mayor. It is not on your agenda this evening. So then if a council member who had voted in the favorable direction would like to make a motion to reconsider, that would be an option for a reconsideration of that resolution and the precise ballot language. We also had an opportunity to clarify what exactly gets published in the voter pamphlet. And so the voters will see the ballot language, which has the word limit, but in the voter pamphlet, required is the actual sales tax ordinance itself. So they will see all of this, the oversight committee, all of the stipulations that are contained. So this, and I apologize if earlier in the conversation it sounded like this was more of a paperwork step that we just provided to the Registrar of Voters, but it's more than that. The actual ordinance itself is fully transparent and will be available to the voters. And if you wish, one option for your consideration would be to add a recital or a whereas statement to clarify that, in fact, this is a general purpose tax, so that way in both places it'll be abundantly clear to the reader. So those are some suggestions and some findings, and again, the staff team is all here to assist you. Thank you.
Okay, questions? I saw Councilmember Jensen first.
Clarification. Your last suggestion to add a whereas statement, I take it that it would be part of a reconsideration and a rescission of the original language, correct? That's not an editorial change. Well, given the attorney's assessment that we have a resolution that's been considered passed that contains ballot language that was signed by the mayor that would need a reconsideration, how is it that the council could add a whereas without a reconsideration given that advice?
So this is an ordinance that was introduced by title only at your last meeting. The mayor indicated that, the town attorney indicated that our recitals are essentially discretionary. So if we wanted to add a recital, we could certainly add something without it being a reconsideration, because the ordinance is still open for adoption.
In the ordinance, not in the ballot language.
Correct.
Or
yes.
the resolution.
That's correct. Okay. We're only talking about the ordinance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we would need a second reading again if we made an addition this time? Or we can figure that out later.
I think when it's simply a recital and not a whole new stipulation, then it could be part of the adoption of the second reading.
Okay. Councilmember, actually I saw Vice Mayor next. Let's go with him.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I would be inclined to go ahead, based on what the findings were of the staff, to make the motion and adopt the recommendation in the staff report to adopt the ordinance that was introduced at the Town Council meeting of June 5th, imposing a general transaction and use tax for a period of 20 years.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second? Councilmember Jensen?
I'm going to second the motion for the reason, a couple of reasons, but given the discussion, I think the ballot language makes clear that it is a general tax, that it can be used at the discretion of the council. It has an oversight committee. The oversight committee and the finance committee and the council would retain discretion over the spending of any funds that were raised by the tax should it pass. These are things that we discussed before. The ordinance is available to the public to review. So given those items, I think that there's sufficient transparency in the current language that we have to go forward with the ordinance and the resolution.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Councilmember Sack, would you like to ask more questions?
Yeah, I'll try what you did last to the maker of the motion. Just adding one more recital tonight that makes the whereas perfectly clear that this is going to the general fund. That will just further explain, without causing a delay in the process, that this is a general tax going into the general fund, so that there is very little ambiguity.
Is that interesting to the maker of the motion?
I will do that. I just want to make sure that there will be no holdups from staff.
As we understand it, there should be no holdups.
And even if there is, we can still do the second reading in August and be on track.
Yes.
Okay. And is that okay with the seconder of the motion?
Understanding that the council is going to have an opportunity to look at this again in August, yes.
Well, it may not be necessary for council to see it again in August.
Okay, so that's where I'm confused, because the mayor said a second reading in August. What I understood the process to be was if we wanted to add a whereas that basically said, whereas this is a general tax, the funds of which can be spent at the discretion of the council, blah, 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 and that's interpreted as an editorial change, then the second reading could be accomplished this evening.
Correct.
With that suggested language. Is that correct?
That's our understanding from the town attorney. However, if something should change, we do have a meeting on August 7th and just want to look at the clerk and verify that that would still work for the deadlines.
Before I agree to that, as the seconder, does the attorney or the council have any suggested language other than what I've said? Because to me, a whereas should be, it's a general tax. Once you start getting more detailed than that, it could be problematic.
While they're looking, did you want to respond, Ms. Clerk?
Sure. August 10th is the deadline that we have to get the information to the Register of Voters.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, but I think what we could do, because one of the things we're trying to do is make sure that the ballot language is consistent and wedded with the ordinance. So we would probably take language directly out of the ballot language and provide a whereas to the effect of, whereas these are unrestricted general revenue, or whereas these.
Whereas this general tax measure,
can be
if adopted,
for,
will provide potentially unrestricted revenue sources for general purposes?
We would want to use language very similar to what's in the ballot language, and it would be very consistent with the fact that these are unrestricted, these taxes are for unrestricted general revenue purposes. And the reason we made the comment we made earlier is we have been utilizing the resources of a tax measure consultant, and so why we believe that this is within our purview to make a non-material editorial change and add a whereas, we will still run it by that individual.
Okay, I'm hesitant to agree with that as the seconder, because it doesn't sound, if there is still a question pending, I don't understand how the council could go ahead with a second reading and adoption if there's a question pending about something that we're directing.
Because we believe it is within your authority tonight to do exactly what we're stating, but it's our job to make sure we dot all the I's and cross all the T's. The town has never enacted a sales tax measure before in its history, and so we just make sure that we do all our due diligence. Our current understanding is this is totally within your purview this evening.
I respect everything you're saying, and of course you should do your due diligence, but it doesn't sound like it's finally settled. But in order to get this moving, I will accept that addendum to the motion.
Oh, and actually, I just saw that it's actually in the CEQA references on page 8 of 9, section 2.60.150. It says very clearly, this ordinance imposes a general tax that can be used for any legitimate government purpose. It is not a commitment to any particular action. So that language is actually contained in the ordinance now.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. I want to make sure that I understand the terminology we're using, because I'm looking at the staff report from the last meeting, and there's in a block with a yes, no, shall the measure to fund essential town services such as maintaining neighborhood police patrols, etc. And then it says yes or no. I look at that, and that is the ballot question. I might be using the wrong terminology. So that when I'm marking my ballot and I'm making my line to the yes or to the no, this is what I'm reading. So the question is, am I incorrect or correct in that regard?
When you open your ballot, you will have a sample ballot, and it will have the short description that you just read. That was the resolution that the council adopted. As part of your voter pamphlet, if you're interested, you have the ability to look at the ordinance itself, the arguments for, the objective analysis from the town attorney, and arguments against. So depending upon how much studying a particular voter does, you will have all that additional information, including the ordinance. So So it just depends on the voter. If there's some voters, they understand exactly what the language means. They're done. There are others who want to know what are the pros and cons, what's the objective analysis. I want to read that ordinance for myself, et cetera. So it just depends on the voter. But all that information will be available.
Councilmember Sack.
And if you could clarify, so the town provides the ballot language. Does the town, and we provide the ordinance that is there, and those are the two things that the town provides to this.
The town also does the independent analysis by the town attorney.
Got it. Okay.
So let me figure out where the current status of the motion is. Councilmember Jensen?
Question for staff. Ms. Pravetti, you indicated that, I think you said that the ordinance that's before us tonight already includes the general tax statement. If so, where is that?
In the sequel.
I'm sorry, it was on page 8 of 9 in section 2.60.150. I'm sorry, section 4, compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act paragraph, and it's in the second sentence. This ordinance imposes a general tax. So there is language, but just to be on the safe side, we did consult with Rob Schultz, and he said that it is perfectly fine for you to add a recital this evening as part of the second reading.
And it would not be inappropriate to take that exact same language you've just read and put it somewhere else, whereas, below?
Yes, we would be happy to do that if that's the will of the council.
Thank you.
Okay, so that may be different than what was originally okayed by the maker of the motion. Are you okay with what they just said, maker of the motion?
Yes.
Okay.
It's okay with the seconder.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What most of the people in this community are going to see is shall the measure to fund essential town services, yes or no? That, to me, is telling or implying to our community that the monies will be used for police patrols, traffic flow, repairing potholes, and neighborhood streets. That, in my opinion, is misleading to the public. I understand that we've just put wording in the ordinance which will be contained somewhere in the materials delivered to our homes. However, that specific wording that people will be responding yes or no makes it sound as though this is a special tax, a specific tax that is only being used for these items. And I think that is misleading to our community, and I think it could be worded in such a way that it is not misleading. So for that reason, I'm not going to support the motion.
I'll go ahead and make a comment, I think, at this point. I guess I do think the wording is true. When I look at where we're going in the future, we have budget projections not too far in the future where we may have to cut town services. When the next recession comes, and think back to the past recessions, what did we do? We started cutting town services. We may have to reduce the number of police we have patrolling. We may have to reduce the number of library hours we have. We may have to reduce how often the trash is picked up in the parks or the maintenance in the parks are done. I think these are the first places that when recession comes and our budget gets tight, we're going to start having to cut. So I see this as money making sure that we have to cut least, we may at some point have to cut anyway, but it will hopefully delay the point at which we're going to have to cut those services. In addition, our pension liabilities increase. As we know, CalPERS is reducing their assumed investment return. They're stepping it down each year, we got 2-3 more years. They're stepping it down an eighth or a quarter. I guess it's an eighth of a percent per year, something in that range, which generates more unfunded liability because the money that we've already given is going to return less over the life of when it's needed. so more money will be needed to put in. So each year, CalPERS will now say, well, you have more unfunded liability. You now need to contribute a larger amount to catch up your regular contribution plus catching up with now what's now unfunded. All these things are going to, and that's going to be a required dollars. When we are required to put that in, where are we going to cut? We're going to cut from the services of the town. So I really see this tax as an opportunity to at least delay or possibly head off the cutting of services at some point not that far in the future. Councilmember Jensen.
I just needed to respond to Councilwoman Spector's comments. I don't think the language is deceptive. I think we have plain language that says unrestricted general revenue purposes. I think I have faith in our community, in the voters of our community. All you have to do is come to a council meeting and see how careful our residents are about paying attention to everything. If you're like me, you actually do read the ordinance in the ballot pamphlet, just like I read the statement that the candidate has, even though it's not there on the box that says vote for Joe Blow or vote for Jane Doe. I go and read their statement. Or I read a ballot proposition. And I think that it's fair to assume that people will do that and that people are careful, especially when we're asking them to make a vote that is going to be an expenditure of their funds. So I don't think this council is adopting any language that is at all deceptive. I think that we are stating flat out that it's unrestricted uses and that it's a discretionary balance. And if you go and read the ordinance, you will figure that out without a problem. And I have faith that our voters in Los Gatos will do that.
Okay. More comment? Okay, Councilmember Sack.
So first of all, I want to thank staff and my council members for bearing with me because I had several questions tonight. And I think I want to just clarify how important this is that we are undertaking. We are asking residents to look at what's on the ballot, and we are asking them, are they willing to make this decision? And it's a significant issue that we're putting a lot of thought on. There were some questions raised. I think it was a good discussion on exactly what the unfunded capital needs are in this town. And again, it's always a learning lesson on my part on what's the yearly budget versus the forecasted needs. I think it's been made clear at not only tonight's meeting as well as previous meetings, the unfunded capital needs of our town, the services that we put into our personnel, that includes our police, that includes our public works. Those are services that we provide to our residents and that have a cost to it. And so I feel comfortable that the questions I asked were answered tonight. I feel comfortable with the last recital that makes it abundantly clear that this is a general tax. And for that reason, once again, I'm going to vote for it. This is a question we're asking our residents, and I think it's a question that's fair, and ultimately it will be our residents' decision on whether or not they would like to impose the sales tax on themselves.
Okay, seeing no more comments, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Okay, it looks like it passes 4-1. Councilmember Spector opposed. Thank you. Moving on to item number 17. Thank you, the members of the public that have waited patiently through this. As you see, we take recommending tax measures very, very seriously. So with that, staff, we could go to item number 17, which is animals and fowl ordinance modifications.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. This ordinance was written in 1994, and as the person who chiefly works with it, we have conducted a comprehensive review and, based on my experience as well with it, determined that it needs revisions in order to give the town attorney's office and code enforcement tools for enforcement, clarity in definitions, responsibilities, and processes. Some of the specific items that have been crying out for revision involve restraint of dogs and a delineation of definition of categories of dogs that would need enforcement action, such as potentially dangerous, and vicious. What behaviors constitute those categories, and what conditions could be imposed by the town for the care and keeping of dogs that have met the criteria to be assigned in one of those categories. Another area of the ordinance that has desperately needed revision is with regard to feral animals and the definitions of animal rescue organizations and people who purport to be associated with them. There have been numerous problems in the town of feral animal feedings that cause widespread destruction to other people's private property. Because if you are feeding cats on your property or on the public street, you are necessarily bringing skunks and roaches and possums and other types of animals that don't just confine themselves to the path to and from the food, but trample all over neighboring properties and make it very dangerous, and sometimes for people to actually just even get to their own cars. This ordinance recodifies and explains the powers of the manager, the town manager, in terms of what they can do to address nuisance animal behavior, and goes into greater detail with regard to what constitutes nuisance behavior. I've been trammeled in the past by the fact that our ordinance to date didn't actually say anywhere in it that a dog shouldn't bite. Therefore, if I had a biting dog, I was unable to cite them for a particular ordinance that they violated, or that the owner violated of the biting dog. It didn't have a procedure for me to take any action with regard to a dog that wasn't impounded at the time of my action. That was the only administrative hearing had to do with a dog that was presently impounded. That's a very rare circumstance. Most dogs are quarantined at home. Therefore, if I wanted to take any action to categorize the dog and attach conditions to his keeping, I had to bring a court action. So this ordinance changes that and gives us much greater tools regarding hearing procedures, and clarifies to the residents as well what their rights and responsibilities are. We've tried in some respects to make some aspects of animal ownership even a little bit easier with this ordinance. We did expand the number of pets that can be owned. It had said 2 dogs and 3 cats. We felt that that was unrealistic in today's culture, so we increased that to 3 dogs and 4 cats per property. And we tried to make beekeeping slightly easier in that I left intact the parameters for distance between bees and neighboring houses are the same as they've always been, but we did insert a provision that by agreement, property owners can decrease those distances if it doesn't cause a nuisance or annoy a neighbor. So for these reasons, we hope that you will accept this this ordinance, approve it by title only, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions at this time? Seeing none, I'll open the public testimony and start with Ted Lascola.
Mr. Mayor, Assistant Mayor, and council members, I'm Ted Lascola, real estate broker and property manager, and I manage the property located at 136 Town Terrace. I'm also occupying that property for the last 18 months. In the last 12 months in particular, we've had a major problem with wildlife, and the reason is what the member of the council there had talked about, feeding of feral cats, feeding also of skunks. I'm not aware of the possums. They're usually not a problem, but the skunks certainly are. And what has happened, for what I've seen, is that the mother skunk has brought the baby skunks and other family members, particularly since spring. And what you've mentioned about people getting in and out of their cars actually happened to me. where I actually pulled into the carport, and their skunks were underneath all the cars. What we're finding out is one of the tenants that lives at the property next door at 130 Town Terrace is probably the main person who's been feeding. Apparently, when I've spoken with her about not feeding, she says, I'm just feeding cats. Well, feeding cats inside of your property, inside of your apartment in this case, is different than feeding them under cars on the main street of Town Terrace. And of course, this is all happening after dark. So if, for example, other people living in the neighborhood are walking their dogs, which we've never had problems with dogs, by the way, in that area, and I know there are problems in other areas with dogs, but in this particular area, people walk them on leashes. And in several cases, the skunks have actually skunked the dogs, including 2 people that live in the apartment that I manage, the complex, not the apartment, the complex. Actually, their dog got hit twice by skunks, and they brought it to my attention. So I agree, something has to be done. It's also my understanding that this particular tenant who lives at the complex at 130 was also cited maybe in the last week. I don't know if she's cited by animal control, but it was brought to my attention that she actually got cited in writing. Now, she's not here this evening because I know who she is. And again, I've spoken to her more than once about this. And she just tells me that she was the manager of that building, which, come to find out, she's not the manager because I just met the owner of the building next door at 130 Town Terrace. And so she lies. She's a habitual liar about what she does. She says she takes care of animals at other centers, and she's an elderly lady. I think she needs help. I don't know if the citation is going to stop her, but I think just as soon as the food stops, the animals will probably go back to the wilderness.
Thank you. Let's see if you have any questions. Vice Mayor.
So, Mr. Lascola, this individual is feeding native California wildlife. What types of food is it the same? Is she putting out cat food and the skunks are eating the cat food? Is that what's occurring?
Yes, that's correct. In cans. She leaves out the cans, so she'll pop open the can, set it under her car. Other people's cars, not necessarily hers. She also does it behind carports to the property owners. Because we actually called my owner, who also lives in Los Gatos, and told him I had to clean out the back of the carports from any growth because we felt that there was skunk nests hanging out there.
One more.
Go ahead.
Has there been any effort by your property manager to dissuade this individual from doing this? I don't know if it's like a violation of their lease, if they can send out an announcement to the complex targeting everybody saying, hey, don't feed the wildlife in order to prevent this from occurring.
Unfortunately, I don't manage that particular property or apartment that she resides. I manage the building next door. So all I've done is stop by, because I drive the area rapidly daily, and talk to her. She's not a bad person. She just has apparently an illness about feeding stray cats outside, and not necessarily outside of her apartment, but outside in the street, underneath cars, in carports, behind carports. And these animals are running all over the place, not just on Town Terrace, but also cross streets, according to my information.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Lascola. Next up, I have, I'm going to put my glasses on, make sure I have any chance of getting this last name, Judy Ventimiglia. Ventimiglia.
Good evening. I happen to be the owner of 130 Town Terrace. I've lived in town for 43 years. I have a number of rental properties in town. I have never had such a problem with, I'm going to have to say my tenant. I'm sure she's not the only one. I'm sure other people feed wild cats. I happen to only be addressing my situation because of the community that's it's affected. We meaning the property management, Forbes Group, has managed that property for me for 17 years. They have not been able to stop her. This has been going on for 5 years, that we cannot get her to stop feeding these cats. She will take milk. I've seen it. I'm right next to it. She opens up tuna cans. It's spread out into the streets. It then produces the possums, the raccoons, which also get in the neighbors' houses when they leave their doors open in the summer. The skunks in particular. And then we have the cockroaches and more cockroaches. This is not just Town Terrace. This is Rushmore. It's Avery. It's all the way down towards the bocce courts. These animals are just running rampant. The neighborhood, I'm sure you're all aware of next door. And I was, of course, reading it because I like to keep up on everything around the area. Until I read this. Cockroaches, are you part of the problem or the solution? There's 24 people who wrote in and commented about the unsanitary conditions regarding feeding the feral, quote, feral cats. It's enormous. It's just, and I need you to help write something in an ordinance or a town code that can then give me some more backbone to get her to back off this. And that's what I'm here for tonight.
Okay, it looks like you have a question from Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So, Ms. Ventremiglia, when you read this new ordinance this evening, have you had a chance to look at it?
Just briefly.
Okay. I was going to ask you if there was any other things you'd like to add, but if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, then...
My concern was if, I don't know if there's going to be citations that can be issued, or I've talked with code enforcement here, and of course they say they don't really have anything they can do right now. So I think if she were issued some kind of a citation, and numerous ones, we could enact perhaps a new situation where we would advise our tenants, there's 7 in that particular building, that any more than 1 or 2 citations, we will have to take further action and see if we can maybe even have to generate an eviction notice because of it, because we just don't have any other place to go right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, seeing no more questions, thank you. I have no more cards on this subject. Would anybody else wish to address us on this one? Nobody else wants to tackle skunks, I see. All right, so I will close the public testimony. Come back to council. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question of staff. You've heard the testimony of the concerns. Is it your sense that your proposed ordinance is able to address these issues as much as the law will allow?
Yes. The ordinance that we have currently does not speak at all to the feeding of either wild or domestic or feral cats on private or public property. So we have no law under which to cite anybody who is doing this. Our San Jose Animal Care and Control, our contractor on this regard, has tried to cite for disturbing wildlife, but that takes an intentionality to be actually feeding the wildlife. And if the person is feeding cats, which aren't technically wildlife, then they're really not violating that state code section. This ordinance has been rewritten to include section 4.10.085, which makes it unlawful for any person to feed food to any animal on public or private property, even their own, if the animal is wild or feral. And again, that's because you cannot confine a feral animal to the private property of the individual feeding it. So it now speaks specifically to that behavior, whereas it was completely silent on it before. And it also speaks to the definition of an animal rescuer and what that person can or can't do. They must be affiliated with a legitimate agency, and they're not to be just leaving food out on the ground for wild or feral animals. So it clarifies, and it would make the conduct in question illegal. And then with regard to enforcement, we have our ability to administratively cite, fine, and escalate it to a criminal complaint if need be.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to make a motion to move for the introduction and first reading of an ordinance by title only, amending Chapter 4.10 of the Los Gatos Town Code entitled Animals and Fowls. I do understand that, other people might want to talk, but I thought it was a very detailed work. The ordinance was very detailed, and so I'm ready to go forward.
Okay, Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. I will second the motion, and I have some comments. I hope that this will bring some order to what is going on Town Terrace and other places, and perhaps those. When would this take effect, assuming that it gets adopted this evening? Is this immediate?
Second reading next.
Second reading.
Second
in
reading
August?
in August.
Okay. I would hope that by the second reading, should this be adopted this evening, that the owners of the properties could post signs and say, town ordinance says this, you will be cited for feeding wildlife. That might make it go away quicker. And hopefully there can be some resolution for the property owners and the residents.
Have a motion and a second. Any further comments? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, passes unanimously. Thank you for everybody's patience to get to this one. Now we're moving on to item number 18, which is going to be a discussion of town objective standards, possible changes to town objective standards.
Excuse me, Mayor, I need to read the title of the ordinance.
I thought of that 30 seconds ago and forgot already.
An ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos amending Chapter 4.10 of the Los Gatos Town Code entitled Animals and Fowl.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'll just have a very brief presentation. On June 4th, the Town Council and the Planning Commission had a study session regarding newly enacted and upcoming housing laws. Several of the previously enacted laws and upcoming laws may strengthen or require a community to rely more heavily on objective standards. Following that study session, the mayor asked that this be put on an agenda, so it's before you this evening. Tonight we'll provide an opportunity for the council and any members of the public who are still with us and wish to speak to provide input and direction to staff on potential amendments to existing objective standards or direction on potential new objective standards that may not be contained in any of the town's planning documents. There is a desk item for this matter, and that concludes staff's remarks, and we're here to help you through this discussion.
Okay, so we'll start off with questions, and I'll just point out, actually, it looks like the desk item is mostly ideas I had, because I know people have said in the past, well, how do you make these things objective? And I thought about, a few of the examples that we worry about. Privacy, windows are, we always have discussions at Planning Commission and even Council about, windows looking into somebody's yards and how do we solve it? And and some say, well, that's an objective. That's not an objective standard. How do we make it objective? So I wrote some ideas. I know we're not going to try to adopt those, but I was hoping to just spur some ideas of maybe what's possible. I know they're not worded the way the attorneys on our council would word them, but they were supposed to be just some ideas. And also in here is, starts off with just a reminder that really what we're trying to do is probably not write any objective standards tonight, but give more direction for staff to work on what areas would we like to work on, potentially finding more objective standards, and then even what process would we like it to go to the policy committee, for example, and maybe make sure that we invite the architect community or some other communities. These are some of the things I was thinking of. So my expectation is that's maybe the direction we would go. And with that, we'll let council members ask questions. Any questions at this point? Okay, so seeing no questions, I'll open the public testimony. I don't have any cards on this item. Would anybody in the audience wish to address us on this item? See nobody coming forward. I'll close the public testimony. So that brings us back to council members for questions, comments. Councilmember Jensen.
Just a procedural question to make sure that I understand what we're doing tonight. We're not making any motions. We are making suggestions to provide, quote, direction, unquote, to the staff.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, this makes it, if I don't have to make motions, I can just talk. What I was looking for staff to do and to provide input and guidance to the council and also the community. And you're right, Mr. Mayor, I've lived for 40 years with the concept of what is objective and what is subjective, and so it is my world. But I'm also assuming that it's the planning director and the planning department's world. So I would be asking staff to locate subjective words or phrases in our ordinances, standards, et cetera, and provide objective wording. And then I gave myself examples of subsections 4 and 6 of the Architecture and Site Ordinance, which was our Attachment 5, and subsections C and D of the Subdivision Map Act, which was Attachment 6. And so if I were the Community Development Department, I would be looking at those particular areas and anything else and change the wording to something that is objective as opposed to subjective. And following up on the memo desk item from the mayor, an ordinance could say the building shall not be any higher than 20 feet. And then if we wanted to give it more latitude, the ordinance could say, in order to have a building taller than 20 feet, the applicant must apply to the Planning Commission. But that's to get around the 20 feet. But what I would be looking at is for things like 20 feet. And there are some issues like community character or consistent with the neighborhood that is going to take some work on the staff's part and then ultimately on ours. Oh, and going to the issue of how I would see this process going, I would see it starting from staff, and then since some of these are ordinances, I would like to just have it come back to the council. But since some of these things are ordinances, they were going to have to go through a process that will at a minimum include the Planning Commission and might include the General Plan Committee and the Planning Commission.
Okay. Other comments? As you can tell by the 3 examples that I provided, I thought that, these are the things that seem to get talked about a lot that don't have exactly objective standards, the privacy of windows. I called it architectural style. I think Councilmember Spector called it community character. Community character is far more subjective and maybe harder to get to objective, but it's the same kind of thing. Does a house fit in? What can we do? And I know I was reaching a little bit on that one, but again, it was maybe it'll spur some ideas that others may have, but it seems like, I worry that if we don't have some limitation, somebody could build just some building that completely not like anything you've ever seen in Los Gatos before, and we know that that's not something or at least we almost never would approve something like that. How do we make sure that doesn't happen? I mean, at least I would want, well, you have to pick from this list of architectural styles, and you could, at the broadest, list every architectural style in Los Gatos, maybe minus the few strange houses. I'm reluctant, but I would say if you drive down Loma Alta Street, is it? Loma Prieta, the one over off of Inglewood, there's a house, I think, that sits in the county that doesn't look like anything around it or anything else in Los Gatos. We'd want to, if the state makes it such that we can't be subjective, we want to somehow make sure we don't get with something that's just completely ridiculous to Los Gatos. Even if it's a broad range of architectural styles, or maybe you have some better ideas. And the third category I put down was view quarters. That's something that we work on constantly is view quarters, and I just made something up. I'll read what I said here as an idea, but I think, again, it is an area that we probably want to work on. I said a new building or addition cannot block more than 30% of a hillside view from a residence window, outside sitting areas, a public street, or a sidewalk. Maybe that's too broad, but as a starting point, how do we think about how do we make sure that somebody can't just block the rest of the views in town, because we know that's something we talk about continuously. So those are three I thought high probability ones. I don't recall which sections. Hopefully they're in 4 and 6, or C and D and attach in 5 and 6. That was already suggested. Any other comments? Councilmember Jensen.
Take a completely different tack. I'm assuming that you're doing direction back to the soon-to-be appointed General Plan Committee. But Mayor, thank you for writing down these ideas. And I think that the desk item is a perfect example of why you need to be careful with objectivity. Because I look at these suggestions and I say, so having moved into a house where I got teeny tiny little windows and I lived in a cave, I don't want to have to penalize someone for living in a new house and have an obscure window that's 6 feet off the ground. That's a little bit unreasonable. Do I want everything to be Craftsman? No. I think innovation is good. I know the house you're talking about, and I like it. So where does that come out for objectivity? View quarters make more sense because it's measurable, it's verifiable. You could do a percentage. It's not, I like that view, I don't like that view that architecture is or that something else is. For it to be objective, it has to be, it's 10 foot high or it's not. It's a view quarter that maintains 30% or it doesn't. Not, I like Craftsman and you can't have anything else. That's subjective. So I would ask the staff to look at things that are actually measurable and can be the subject of an objective standard that makes some sense. And I would also ask the staff to be careful in when it looks at things, and I'm sure the staff is doing this, but to keep in mind that everything has an effect on something else. So if I say a building can only be 20 feet high, I may now trigger an exception or I can't remember the word for it now, in the state density bonus law where I get a concession or I get whatever I have because I have to comply with state law. Or I change the FAR to make it smaller and I'm now not complying with state law for accessory dwelling units, or I've created an impediment for affordable housing. And then what happens? Then we can't meet our RHNA, and we encourage state laws to take away local discretion because clearly what we're trying to do is prevent a particular type of development. So I want us to tread very carefully, because if we go in a direction where we can't meet RHNA numbers, for example, that has an potential economic consequence. It has a consequence for our general plan. Those dollars that we want to spend on art or unfunded liabilities, we're going to spend on paying a fine to the state because we have not allowed affordable housing or met our RENA numbers. Or we're going to encourage a state legislator to recognize that we're not being responsible about how we're managing development and then get a state law that takes all discretion away. So all I'm asking us to do is be really careful, and if it makes sense and to be objective, great. If it's inherently subjective, please let's not go there.
Okay, other comments? Councilmember Sack?
So the only thing I would echo a lot of the comments here. Speaking to what can be defined, I'm looking at the hillside view and something about residence windows. And so the only thing I would ask staff is when we are trying to define areas, it's going to be hard once you get into private areas. So for taking hillside view as an example, a corridor from a public spot. I think a perfect example that we had was with Alberto Way. Well, the view corridor on which spot? This spot, like how do we define exactly where we're calculating? Because that was a perfect example where if you were on the sidewalk, you saw one view, yet if you were on someone's doorstep, you saw another view. And so as much as we can keep it on a public right-of-way, I think that would be a helpful way to measure things. So. And
I would add maybe a little bit in response to Councilmember Jensen. I don't think that, what I'm responding to is if we get the point we can't really make subjective determinations, does that mean we never want to worry about views again? We let anything happen. We worry about it all the time. So just giving up on protecting Los Gatos? Are we, never going to worry about the windows that look into somebody's bedroom kind of thing next door? We worry about that all the time. Is there some way to preserve the way that we usually try to protect Los Gatos? I realize it's really tough to write it so that we don't get, too constrained, So I guess, and my suggestions weren't meant to be the final product at all. They were meant to be some ideas, and maybe Councilmember Jensen would never agree to some of those, but maybe we could make them still pretty good that she'd almost agree. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have confidence that staff is going to be able to move forward with this project in a reasonable fashion, and I just pulled up attachment 4, which are the hillside development standards, and there's a sentence in there: grade to the minimum amount necessary. If this is going to require objectivity, then I'm going to assume that what we will be getting back from staff, based on their knowledge, is wording that talks about quantifying that. And what is the quantification, the minimum quantification of grading to the minimum amount necessary? Is it going to be by cubic feet? Is it going to be by reduction in height? I don't know what the answer is, but I'm comfortable that the Community Development Department will. And then, and I think, again, this comes from the mayor's memo, an exception can be granted if the person goes to, or the entity goes to, whatever, DRC, Planning Commission, General Plan Committee.
Okay, any further direction? It's a big task. We're trying to narrow staff's work a little bit. I think Councilmember Spector has suggested some narrowing. I'm not sure if staff going to kind of stay in the area suggested so far. Does that seem like the direction you're getting? Maybe you can summarize what you think your direction is.
Well, I think the direction's pretty broad, so
that's what I'm concerned about.
Be quite an undertaking. I think many of the things that you attempted to deal with really kind of deal with the building envelope, whether that's visibility, views, privacy, again, that's setbacks, height, second story setbacks, coverage, those types of things. We'll probably take this input and go back, look at what that looks like from a workload perspective, start preparing those things and figuring out, we're inevitably going to have potential items that will change in the general plan, items that will change in the zoning code, items that will change in policy documents. Those all have different paths that they would go down. We typically don't take zoning code or policy documents to the general plan committee. That would be the general plan amendments. The policy documents we technically could take to the policy committee. Zoning code amendments obviously have to go to the planning commission before they can come to the town council. So I think we'll have to come up with a game plan and probably circle back with council in August and kind of look at next steps and what realistic timelines are for getting some of this in front of probably council first, from my perspective, to get some initial input on are we going down the right path or not. And then once we kind of get that yellow or green light, moving forward to that next step.
And so one thing I said early when I introduced it was I think it's important to get the architecture community involved, or particularly the developers or somebody. I think you probably start with the architect, because they may have some good ideas on what doesn't constrain their creativity, but I think the ones that work here all the time understand these, so they may have some ideas that maybe will help staff not have to work so hard. You'll have to work hard to figure out all the areas we want to look at, but they may be able to help on some possible solutions, because we know that when we get down to the last day, when we're finally ready to pass an ordinance, they're going to go, what are you doing? And show up. So let's try to, when they show up, they'll be saying, yes, we've worked with the planning department all along, and these are great ideas.
We'll do some initial outreach to that effect. I want to make sure, though, that the listening audience and the council, which I believe the council knows, some of these things aren't going to be silver bullets. If someone comes through with the density bonus project, whether it's going through SB 35 or Housing Accountability Act, they can ask for waivers and concessions to any of our rules. So we're not going to be able to address every situation. The other is looking at probably crafting objective standards that are going to apply across the board, whether that's a single family house or that's 2 or more, which triggers the Housing Accountability Act. So they get to a lot of the same issues. It's neighborhood compatibility, it's privacy, view protection. But we'll bring back those items and get some next steps going forward.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Given the amount of work and the volume of work that staff is identifying, and I don't disagree with that, it may be that another level of analysis that needs to be done is prioritizing. In other words, here's everything that needs to be done, but the most important thing is identified by the issue that comes up the most, and I don't know what it is, architecture and site, I don't know. But prioritize, besides defining the scope, prioritizing and giving input to us as to what the most effective way of dealing with this wealth of issues is.
Okay, I think we're running out of steam, so hopefully you have enough direction. So I'll go ahead and close this item then, and we'll move on to item number 19.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Monica Wren, Economic Vitality Manager. I'll try to keep my comments brief tonight in respect of the hour, but please know that we're here, all of us as staff, to offer any additional information or answer any of your questions. Before you is a recommendation from the Policy Committee this evening for a resolution that allows our businesses to modify, our restaurants to modify their existing CUPs at the DRC level, the Development Review Committee, for a period of 18 months. This would streamline our modification process and reduce the fees significantly for many of our businesses. The Town Council and the Policy Committee have been working diligently over the last couple months to really identify and modify, modernize a lot of our policies to provide a streamlined, faster, cheaper, easier way for our businesses to remain relevant and stay successful in town. This resolution would allow our businesses to modify their CUPs to clean up outdated information that's in them and then provide a greater opportunity for them to stay here in town and remain relevant. The recommendation includes an 18-month timeline, much like the formula did at your last meeting that we considered. It would only be open to existing restaurants with existing CUPs, and they would not be able to expand into another space. It would be right where they are. I've had at least 5 restaurants come forward over the last year looking to modify, but the risk, the time, the money has all just proven to be too prohibitive for them. So I think that this is a way for many of our restaurants to find a way to get more latitude and to stay here in town. The DRC is still a public meeting, so there would be public noticing that would take place. There would be public comment available, and there would still be an appeal process. If anybody came forward for a new conditional use permit, they would be put through the process that's in place now. The DRC are currently our deciding body for minor restaurants outside of the C2 district or the downtown, so it is something that's often considered by them. That concludes staff's comments, and we're here for any further questions.
Okay, questions for staff? Councilmember Jensen?
Thank you, Ms. Wren. I just was hoping you could give us an example and a comparison of the fees that one would pay for DRC review versus Planning Commission, then on to Town Council, number one. And number two, we did get a letter as a desk item. And if you could give us just an example of maybe using that business disparities for like businesses that are right next to each other or within a block of each other.
Absolutely. So if you want to modify a conditional use permit, currently the code requires that the business will go to the original deciding body. So if the restaurant has alcohol, then the original deciding body was the council. If it did not, and it's a minor restaurant, or if it's a restaurant in downtown, it would have to go back to the Planning Commission. The fees to go to Town Council is approximately $9,000. The fees for the business to go to our DRC would be about $3,200. Planning Commission's in the middle, around $5,000. The DRC can get through an application in 6 to 8 weeks, whereas the council, sometimes it's up to 6 months by the time we get through all of the steps for the business to modify. And so Hannah is the business that we received the desk item from tonight. I've been working pretty closely with her. So she inherited a conditional use permit that was very difficult to follow because the business was originally 2 separate restaurants. A wall was built in between, and the way the CUPs were situated, it's really kind of unclear even for staff when we look back through the staff reports how it all unfolded that way. So for someone in her position, she can have beer and wine, but she can't serve cocktails with her meals. She would like to increase to cocktails. Her CUP also limits her to something like 11 seats, I think off the top of my head, which is quite difficult to run a business with such a small number of seats. So as we did modify the seats in the code, I think what she's looking to do is kind of come back and clean that up and have, that conditional use permit that reads what she truly wants to have in her business, and then expand to have the cocktails so that she can have those and pair them with her dinner offerings.
Go ahead, Councilmember Jensen.
And just to follow up on that example, the things that you're talking about for that particular business all conform with our current policies, correct?
That's correct.
Thanks.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, nice kudos to you from Hannah's letter. So great. The issue that comes up when you live in a community like Los Gatos is that you have residential, or you very well can have residential and a commercial close or adjacent to one another. So we come up with the issue of noise, and that's happened, throughout my memory of Los Gatos. It's happened with places like Los Gatos Bar and Grill and CB Hannigan's and Old Town. And in each of those instances, in varying ways, the issue of noise has been resolved. So my question is, under this process, let's assume that we use the DRC, how would a neighbor or a neighborhood raise the issue of noise? And I'm not going to go to music because I know that's separate. But how would the neighborhood raise the issue of noise? And then how would it be addressed? And is that any way different than it currently is being addressed?
Thank you for that question. It's a great question. The neighbors would address it the exact same way they would now. They could reach out to our code compliance. They could call our dispatch. Anytime we get a complaint from somebody regarding noise, we will reach out to that business. We always try to help them resolve that with their neighbors. If it's not, then it's definitely something that can be escalated to either the DRC, or we could have a clause in there that if there are founded complaints, it would go back to their original deciding body. The one thing that the policy committee did recognize, and staff included, is that if somebody's looking to do very late night hours, such as after 11:30 p.m., or they want to add outdoor entertainment that doesn't fit with our entertainment policy after 10 p.m., that the DRC would not decide on that. We would ask for that to go to their original deciding body. So I guess there would be two kind of safety nets in place. One would be our original or our current way to address complaints, and then the second would be that the DRC will not be doing late night approvals.
Thank you.
Okay. Further questions? At this point, I'll open up the public testimony. First up, I have Brayton Gosling.
Good evening. I'll keep it pretty short. On behalf of the chamber, we just wanted to kind of be here and say, we are definitely in support of this. Obviously, I went and reached out to some of our restaurants who are looking to try to make changes right now, and while they would love everything to be free to be able to make these changes, we know that's probably not feasible. So seeing this in a great reduction in the fees is, I think, a great way to find some middle ground to be able to bring people who are either restricted from something maybe from a prior business that may not even be them, or, we took all this time to update and say the new policies are going to be this, but someone's restricted under other policies that are already in place, and it's not really fair. So especially with North 40 coming online, there's a lot of concerns with some of the existing restaurants, particularly in the downtown area, that they really want to be able to modify and update. And hospitality is a constantly evolving industry, and to really find a balance with what the new customers want, the new customers are demanding, is really important, especially with the ever-increasing cost of overhead due to, particularly in this area, due to labor. So that's about it that I wanted to share.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Gosling? Seeing none, thank you. And thank you for sticking with us all the way till now. Next up, Randy Chen. Thank you also for sticking with us all the way to the end.
I would also just like to say that the Chamber supports this resolution.
A little closer to the mic, please.
Oh, sorry. Also like to say that the Chamber supports this resolution. Since these CUPs in question have been in place, you've updated certain town codes, such as the entertainment policy, seats to parking, and a few other things. So this just really allows the businesses with CUPs prior to those to come up to be on an even playing field with the businesses that are coming in that get to enjoy those new codes, the entertainment policy. And so it really just evens the playing field. It gives them a quicker way to go through it and a less expensive way. And it lets them compete with the restaurants that don't need a CUP, which I believe is the North 40.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Chen? Seeing none, thank you. I have no more cards. Would any other members of the public wish to address us on this item? Seeing only shaking heads, I will say close the public testimony, come back to council for motion or questions. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question of staff, Ms. Wren. you had said that there would be there could be requests being made about CUP modifications, which would have to go back to the original body. And I'm looking at your alternatives here in your staff report. And one of them is you have an expansion of hours earlier than 6 a.m. or later than 11:30 p.m. So can one get late night modifications or not, or how's that going to work?
So if a business, say, would to come in and wanted to be open until 1 a.m. to modify their use permit, then we would ask that they go through the original process that's in place, and it would likely be a town council decision or a planning commission if it didn't involve alcohol. But if it's before the 11:30 mark or after the 6 a.m., then we feel like it's within business hours, and that was why their staff recommended that.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Jensen.
I want to try a motion.
Okay, please do.
My motion would be that we adopt the resolution that's in attachment 1 as contained in our staff report, which suspends, well, the language is awkward, but allows people to go to the DRC for 18 months under certain conditions. And Mayor can certainly step in, but as a member of the policy committee, one of the things we were trying to achieve is what Mr. Gosling was talking about, was to really create that even playing field, so that if I got I was a business who had a CUP from 1994 and somebody moved in next to me and had one later, I'm not operating on the same playing field. So this allows people to come into conformance with the standards that the council has now set for outdoor seating, for seating inside, for parking, for alcohol, with state controls. As Ms. Wren pointed out, our noise ordinances are in place. There is an appeal process with DRC. So unless a business is, having a string of complaints, I mean, that wouldn't come up in this kind of process. What we're anticipating is that you can really update your business to come into conformity with those policies that the council has already adopted, and seeing how that works for 18 months and hopefully injecting some streamlining, which the council talked about, and some ability for businesses to really make a go of it here and be more relevant. So that was the thinking. And there are limitations, obviously. If you're not conforming with our current policies, then you do have to go back through that process. But if you are, we tried to give you a better avenue to do that, was the thinking for the policy committee. So my motion is to adopt the resolution.
I think that was eloquently said. I agree with the whole plan and what you said. I'm not sure I could add much to it, other than I often look on the flip side. Well, if we don't approve this, that means there's many businesses that would have to spend maybe as much as $9,000 to take advantage of the many changes that we've made to try to make businesses more successful in town. And if we didn't do this, we'd end up with sort of a myriad of businesses that are not able to take advantage of this one or the other one. And as we said, it's not going to be a very even playing field, and maybe a new business has the advantage of being able to take advantage of all the changes, and the old ones cannot. And these numbers may not sound that large, but they are large for a lot of these businesses that don't make that big a profit. So that was a motion. I need a second. So I'll go ahead and second the motion. Any other comments? Seeing none, then all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing no opposes, it passes unanimously. And this is a resolution, so we don't need any title readings. So with that, then we are adjourned.